everybody patience. Patreon.com/Taylor Durden. Get this thing going. How y'all doing? Just waiting for them to join so we can get started. Let's see. Is it laggy? Okay. You just gotta go to my page, and then you can click, and then you come into the live, and then I can invite you. Yeah, I think I just tried to invite you. Damn. See you in a second. I don't know. See, my invite might not be going through right. There we go. There we go.
Okay, perfect.
There we go. Smooth. Do you hear me all right?
Hello, hello, hello. Testing, testing. 1, 2, 3. I was told that
Do you hear
my
me?
volume was low. How is the volume?
You're fine on my end. I hear you fine.
Okay, perfect. Okay, and I guess this is the first time I've done this. So, oh, someone's in here. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, we people filing in. We got about 20 folks in here so far.
Okay.
Yeah. I don't know how you would like to start, or if you would like to just go through introduction. This is Pharaoh at Pharaoh's House, pharaohshouse.com, and just this individual's got a wealth of knowledge and a lot of insight about a plethora of things, and a different kind of vision than most people have. So, or I guess you could say actual vision that most people just don't have. And yeah, I guess without further ado, we can, however you want to go about it, Farrell, if you want me to just start firing off questions, or if you got something you want to open with.
Yes, I was waiting for your first question. I like to right into it for many reasons. I don't like to take up anyone's day or time. Either listeners, viewers, etc. So I like to go right to it, and as you know, very succinct with answers. So
Yeah,
we'll do that with everything here. Just go right to it.
Should we go into the I guess the relationship thing, or should we just go right into like the bloodline thing and the timeline thing that I was asking you about the other day?
Okay, your choice. What do you think?
I guess we go into the bloodline thing, and then maybe we go into I guess the shape of what a relationship should look like, maybe if you have time. But I guess my questions were, or my initial question was, uh, since we had spoke before about the timeline manipulation and how there's been 1,000 years added to the timeline, I was doing some, I guess, prorating of the timeline, I guess, where supposedly Rome falls in 476, and I was wondering if like there was an event like if this event of 476 is actually 1476, or what we call 1476, and if that's concurrent with the fall of the so-called Mayan Empire, and if that's I guess the last great reset, or if there is, you know, a bunch of miniature ones between. But I just wanted to ask about that, I guess, to kind of set it off, like, because when it comes to resets, like biblically, people, I think a lot of times they point to the story of Noah and his three sons, and so I just wanted to get a timeline on the resets, and I wanted to ask you about the bloodlines of the three sons. So I guess to make a more succinct or concise question is the fall of the so-called Roman Empire, is that 1476?
Or 476 or
Yeah,
1476, right?
yeah.
Allegedly, according to the indoctrinating books, texts throughout the last 150 years, it's been listed as between 450 and 476 CE, so-called CE. But with that 1,000 years difference, yes, you would be correct in that. However, if you were to talk to any so-called historian or professor of history or doctor of history, for that matter, they would tell you that the 1,000 years doesn't change the historical date. That's what they claim.
So these events, I guess there was at some point, like I guess ultimately, you have the fall of the so-called Roman Empire, and then you have these so-called Dark Ages, which would be actually if 476 is 1476, then the Dark Ages would be from there till about, I guess, the 1700s or late 1600s.
Mhm. And the fall of the so-called fall of the Edomite Empire, and coinciding with the so-called Dark Ages, would be that time frame when the change from the Garamanti and what people would call melanated, so-called uh, Cham, Cam, and Shem, or Champa and Shema. Those are literally kingdoms when they were sacked, if you will, and brought down from within as a result of many different reasons, infighting one of them, primarily. They would be your evidence to to point to when all of this occurred. You talk about so-called Mongol horde, and people get in their minds an image based on what you've been taught in books or what the constant propaganda from media that Mongol is equivalent with uh, mutant Han. And when I say mutant, no one should get offended. Mutation is an actual biological term. The one thing to keep in mind before going on, this is not a disclaimer. This is just how I speak and how it is.
Yeah,
Fact
the truth
and
is,
evidence, right, go hand in hand, and they support truth. So there is nothing insulting about it. If you find something insulting, more than likely you're allowing, not you, Taylor, but I mean your audience. If you are finding something insulting, then more than likely you're allowing your emotions to ride your logic or block your logic. And therefore, take a moment, step back mentally, and refresh yourself like you would refresh a page, and then return to it and just listen, take notes, and ask questions primarily when the time is right. When Taylor says it's okay to ask questions.
so
So, in
the
returning to what I was saying, yes, those falls, the so-called falling of those two kingdoms, marked the actual fall of the so-called Shem Empire or Shemitic empires, or not empire, but kingdoms, pardon me, and the Hamitic Empire. what people call Ham or Ham. And the Hamitic Empire was and still is the largest in so-called recorded history, and it spanned the Americas, it spanned so-called Asia, which is everywhere if you think about it, because Asia is Africa, Asia is Europe, Asia is Asia. The only separation is a large mountain range that separates Siberia from whence the mutation originated. The mutation being the, if you want to be genetic about it, the SLC14A5, so-called gene marker that strips eumelanin from the brain, neuromelanin, and from other pathways, creating not just an albine, so-called albino, but a leper as well. And this has occurred throughout timing, throughout so-called history. And what occurs in different kingdoms, sometimes people are pushed out because of that bloodline. And this is where you get the growth of different factions or tribes of pale skinned people, which of course were brought together over time and now under one so-called moniker or label or cohort, so-called white. You can't say Caucasian because, well, Caucasians were some of the groups that had a large, if you want to use that terminology, Caucasian groupings had a large faction of pale or albinoid people within them. But same with so-called Ham or Hamitic people. And people associate Hamitic with just so-called Africa, but Hamitic is Asia, and Africa is Asia, as is Asia. And the so-called Middle East, the so-called Levant, that's all Asia. Mesopotamia, so-called Mesopotamia and Sumer are not where you think they are, which you are told they are. The so-called Shemitic Empire, which would be the so-called Negroid Empire, Negro Empire, spanned from Southeast Asia to the area of so-called Angkor Wat. And if you notice the timeline there, that all fits in. The Shampa, the Shang, so-called dynasties, they all fit within those time frames. And you can look on the map if you find a good map, and you'll see that there are vestige names of these places. And of course, if you visit these places, you'll see some of the remaining evidence, art, if fact and art, of the actual people that were there. So this whole concept of so-called black, so-called white, and so-called black all coming from one place called Africa, you should be able to spot a lie when you hear it. That's ridiculous. Anytime you see throughout history and so-called geography, anytime you see a homogeneous group in one area, that's a sign, a leftover sign of a takeover. And so this is what occurred in Edom, or so-called Rome. The takeover by so-called barbarian groups, mainly albino type groups, ended up with Europe and so-called Eurasia being somewhat homogeneous, Obviously, after sacking and invasions, et cetera, you name it, all the things that go with it, you still have a so-called minority population, whether that's by choice or whether it's just inherently something that's embedded in the code of mankind and human to allow a small remainder. But in some instances, it's shunning and pushing people outside or into the fringes like you see in so-called apartheid states and so-called ethnic cleansing rituals or so-called genocide rituals. They're all the same. So you would see throughout so-called parts of Asia where the Han groups, or what they call Han groups, and the Dravidic groups pushed out certain dark-skinned people of certain so-called phenotypes. So you would see the Shemitic groups pushed out completely or pushed into the Americas. Mind you, the Americas was Hamitic. the Shemitic groups warring with them and mingling with them managed to break apart the Hamitic factions. And then, of course, came, you can look at that timeline too as part of the timeline. Then came in the so-called age of exploration. And you had the slaves and the various barbarian tribes. And when I say slaves, I'm referring to the first blondes or blacks, and these would be pale-skinned people, what you would call white today. They were slaves of various groups. They were slaves of Moors. They were slaves of what you would call today conversos or cryptos. Those are just so-called mulattoes who are mixed with barbarian and Negro, which you would call Jew today. All of them took part in slaving and enslaving what you would call white people for a long time. And slaves revolted. There were several revolts. One of the main revolts that you know of is the so-called French Revolution. Then, of course, the so-called American Revolution. Those are slave revolts. And the Civil War, to a degree, was a slave revolt. So-called white throwing out the, in this case, the so-called Shemitic people or Negroes and taking over, restructuring. You have many different restructurings going on throughout history. You have so-called Renaissance. You have Reconstruction, restructuring, resets. It's all the same. And so what you have in these areas, like you look around the world today, you have areas that are dominated and controlled by mutants or so-called white of various tribes, whether it's Khazarian or Scythian or so-called Germanic. You look around these areas and these are signs. The homogeneity or homogeneous groups will tell you that that is a leftover of an overthrow, an encroachment. So, for example, Brazil, you look at Sao Paulo, just picking one city in Brazil, you would never know who was there first. You would never know that that's a Hamitic city. But you look there today, it looks no different than Tel Aviv. It looks no different than, and why do the people all have a similar so-called phenotype? Because they're all related tribally. And the same thing with the so-called USA and Canada. When people say they're American and they don't want a Mexican in America, that it should be laughable to anybody hearing that, because it's, how can you tell someone you're not from here, but you're now acting like as if you are? That's the psychosis that goes with encroachment, colonization, which is just a euphemism for parasitism.
So, like, I mean, biblically, you had, I guess, in the Torah, you got Egypt or Mitzrayim is already established, I guess, initially, and then supposedly, the story goes, I guess, that Moses leads people out of this destitute state and into their own homeland, which is Canaan, or like a land that's been promised to them, which is Canaan.
And what you hear, there's code in that. There's also transliteration in that. When something is promised, you think, well, you have to think in terms of your own time frame and your own epoch. When something is promised, is it promised through a deity and an angel, or is it promised as a result of some type of negotiations and deliberations? That makes more sense. And so through deliberation and negotiation, a set aside was made for the Shemitic people in a particular zone, which was, so they're surrounded by so-called Canaanites, so all different types. When you think of Canaanites, well, based on, so-called rabbinical lies, I won't name the name, but you know who he was. He was not the only one, but they made that lie up about, the so-called black race. And it wasn't just the so-called Jews who made that up. The so-called Mormons do the same thing. And early Catholicism, or not early Catholicism, but post-colonialism, Catholicism, and Christianity did the same thing. So they're all guilty of it, as did Islam. They all did the same thing, claiming that, okay, this group are all one monolith and they're all black. And it's all a lie from head to toe. They're not black, for one. And two, they're not a monolith. So what occurred in this instance is you have a mix of people in these regions, but they're all related and they're all Hamitic. If you were to look around the world today, you would never guess
that many of the, I don't use the term sub-Saharan because that's an insult. There's no sub, but they always do that again. That's, again, euphemism, trying to put a group of people down, not sub anything. These are the people, these are Hamites, true, not all of them, but there are some Hamites. But if you look at the Hamites there, they are related to so-called Latins or Latinos. They're related to many of the people in Europe, the Nordic people. You look at them, you wouldn't tell in a million years that they're all related. And so that's what you had. Not a lot of pale, there are a lot of albinos, but there are a lot of melanated groups all surrounding this Shemitic people in the land. So it's kind of like a landlocked place almost. And for a period of time, there were no problems. Obviously, people go back and forth over borders and they trade, et cetera, et cetera. And with trade comes intermingling sexually, intermarriage, trading of sharing of legacies. So you have all of this going on for a period of time, which for those Christians and those who are Hebrews or any religions who follow the Tanakh or the Torah, when you read it literally and you think, okay, Shemites should not mix with Hamites. Well, they've been doing it already. Yosef or Joseph mixed with a Hamite, obviously. The daughter of Misraim, that's a Hamite. So no one put him down, and no one put down his offspring. You have Benjamin, you have, in fact, who are considered esteemed prophets, or if not prophets, pillars of the early books of the Bible, leading into King Daud or King David. And King Daud or King David, he found himself a wife, if you will, and she was Hamitic. She wasn't Semitic or Shemitic. So again, you have constant mixing of these people and groups over periods of time, and pushing people out. And then, of course, different timelines have different ways of dealing in politics and people placement. So if you lost a struggle or if you lost a war, you had to pay off a debt. The debt could mean enslavement. Debt could mean loss of property, usually loss of property, loss of land. And you have lots of migrations. We've witnessed or heard about migrations that happen in our own time. We've seen people, making pilgrimages, and I don't mean for spiritual purposes, because they had to get out of one place and they moved into another. We've seen it in so-called North America with the Shemitic or Negroid, so-called Negroid groups coming from the so-called South, being pushed south and pushed west. So, and then, of course, what you don't see and what you don't hear is what's not mentioned in the books. That the so-called, many of the Negro groups, they were pushed through the Pacific into the Americas by the people you call Native Americans. And so, yes, you say to yourself, well, wait, if they were pushed here, yes, they would be their captors. And there's vestige signs of that as well. Many of the so-called Northwest tribes and Western Plains tribes, they're Hamitic, and they enslave so-called Negroes. In fact, they fought for the longest time to maintain that slave ownership, even when it was outlawed. And just like the barbarian groups you call so-called white of the North and the South, who got reparations after so-called Civil War, so did the so-called Indians. They had the Native Americans or whatever. They had to wait a few hundred years, but they're getting their reparations for the most part, especially if they've negated or shunned their mulatto status, being half this, half that one drop thing. And if you look at the so-called 5 civilized tribes, they're headed by Japhethite, so-called offspring of Japheth and Ham.
So when we're looking at the geography of America, kind of like the Mormons, I feel like there's a lot of residual stuff there in Mormonism where they talk about, a lot of events happening in Missouri and I was asking you the other night, I was talking, because we were talking about Mitzrayim, because Mitzrayim is Ham, that's one of Ham's children. And I was I just wanted to know, like, I guess the geography of it, like, was Mexico, because it's like you got Miami of Ohio, and then you got Miami of Florida, then you have the Maya. And I was wondering if this is all the so-called Egyptian empire or Mitzrayim, because like Missouri, Mitzrayim, Missouri, like the names have been altered slightly, like Miami to Miami or Maya. Like I was just wondering if the whole uh, Great River or Mississippi River down into the Gulf in Mexico, is that all Mitzrayim? And I wanted to know, I guess, about Arizona as well, because a lot of people, I guess, point to the Grand Canyon being the original like Giza Plateau, and I just wanted to know like the geography of like where these people were positioned, like if Canaan is California, if Utah is Judah, if Missouri is Mitzrayim, if the Mayan Empire is, if the Seminoles are the Shemites that were part of, I guess the Mayan Empire somehow, like they merged. I guess things get really confounded through this mixing process, and I'm always trying to figure out how to explain the timeline better, and I think it gets difficult because some people are hybrids, and so it's hard to say. It's kind of like, it's kind of like, when someone says like, yeah, if they say, Solomon did this or Solomon did that, and he's from the house of Israel or what have you, but at the same time, his mother was a Hittite, so he's also a Canaanite. So it's like historically, someone could spin it and say that this person, their actions and the things they did were from a Canaanite. And then, so I'm always like, man, how do you draw these lines as far as like when these mergers happened and where people originally were, like geographically on this, realm?
One thing to always keep in mind when it comes to the past, that we are all a remnant of whatever went on then. We have to decipher every bit of information that we have received or we receive through our lifetimes or living, in addition to what we learn from those who come before us. It's very important to, you're going to have to decipher what they give you too. And that's for those who actually do talk to the people who are older than them, whether you dislike someone or not. That's your emotion. So I say, talk to your fathers, talk to your grandfathers, talk to your grandmothers, talk to your mothers, your aunts, your uncles, especially older people. If you have no one older to talk to, there are probably older people in the places where you live. Literally talk to them, find out what they know. And of course, it might be a small amount of data, it might be a large amount of data, but find it. Think of it, and this might be a horrible analogy for some, but think of it like Halloween candy. Once you have your bag full, go home and you're going to decipher it. You might end up with one thing you can eat or very little that you can eat, but you can take that amount of information and use it as a foundation, because some of it you'll be able to negate, you'll be able to compare it. When that whole furor or hype about finding one's genetics was a popular trend for a reason. And and I know, and those who are astute know, during that period of time, I guess, between 2012 and 2023, no pun intended, with those companies that just appeared overnight asking for your DNA, and they would be able to allegedly tell you from whence you came. Well, I always said then, before they started, that's not the way to go. You're being bamboozled and tricked for your body fluids and your connections, because you have no idea what they're going to do with that. But I know what they can do with it. But what you could do, and what you still can do, is trace through papers, many libraries. Now you have them online. Have some records, and you can use those as foundations to find out about where you come from. Obviously, there are places you cannot go because they're deliberately hidden. That's how empires work. You keep information, you keep data hidden. It maintains status quo, it maintains the hegemony. So, for example, you think the Vatican is secretive. Try going into some of the libraries and storehouses in Utah maintained by the so-called Mormons. You'll get shot. At least the Vatican will just escort you out. So this shows you the borders, the names all have changed deliberately. What you call North America was actually part of, it's been many things, but it was part of a caliphate, still is. The whole entire known land masses in this world are part of that caliphate. But the so-called U.S., minus those state borders, because I know you were associating names like Missouri is this. Well, those borders that you see did not exist. No different than the borders you see separating so-called countries or nations. But the borders are there on maps. That's why they had map makers and cartographers do these things for a reason, and why they honor them through their secret society. It's not just all male. In fact, the most secret society is female, but go into that some other time. But they honor these, and they make sure that all schools, all maps, all atlases honor these things too. So the imprint in your brain that this border exists. When you think of California, you think of a state and a state line. But if you take that line away and you think of the potential ancient past and what it could have been or what it was associated with, you might say, well, wait a minute, this is part of Canaan and it's not California. And there are places in the so-called Grand Canyon that point to burial grounds for potentates and pharaohs. But is this Egypt or is this Mizraim? You'll be correct. So just annihilate those borders from your mind. Keep in mind that catastrophe, wars, drought, etc., make people go wherever they can thrive. People are opportunistic. So the thing, though, that they are not too much is innovative when it comes to names. They like to rebuild after catastrophe. So if something happened over here and they didn't go back there, or maybe the practice was to move every 700 years to a new place, they would establish and reestablish. So we just set up another, this is an empire, and the same control systems are there. We'll just name this place the same as this place. So which one is Mizraim 1 and which one is Mizraim 2? There are those that say Mizraim 1 is, you're standing in, well, not you, you're in Switzerland right now, but when you come back, you will be standing in Mizraim 1, so-called America, North America. And Mizraim 2 is the one you see overseas, the one that they take apart like Lego blocks and put this here, put that there. And then, of course, you know, it's old, but not as old as the one in the U.S., so-called U.S. And it's obviously so when you read, you put your scriptures together and you kind of like read and take those accounts from the Bible, like the so-called wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. The place they call the place of wandering is so doggone small, you could get out of it quickly. You would have to be kept in there by either guards and soldiers or so-called divine intervention. But it is so small, it's impossible to get lost in it and stay in it. You would have to stay in it deliberately. But there are places in North America that make more sense.
Yeah, there's no way that Mount Sinai is in Egypt or the modern day Egypt. It's not big enough as far as the biblical. And so, I mean, it's the same thing with the name of like the Sierra Nevadas. From my research, that's actually Mount Seir. So I mean, yeah, like they just remix the names, I guess, alter them slightly or invert them somehow. But I wanted to know, I guess, about these so-called natural borders, because like the Sierras border, you know, I guess Nevada and California, present day, and I wanted to know, like, where was that just a civilization itself? Because like, if these how many of these mountains are melted metropolises, and how many of them are trees, and how many of them are just mountains? And like, how do you tell the difference?
Okay. Well, they claim there's the so-called optical illusion that the brain imposes when one witnesses or experiences or sees something that is familiar to your memory, like you do with clouds, and you say, oh, the cloud looks like a duck, but it's not a duck. You all know the name of that so-called, it's not a disorder, but it's a supposed illusion. Well, some things are not an illusion. If it looks like a pyramid, it's a pyramid. If it looks like a duck, you know the old saying, the duck. Well, there are a lot of those. And then you have to wonder, well, then how did it get to that state over time? You know, I've always said this when I would take people on hikes. I said, be wise, be respectful, because the very rock you kick is probably someone's ancestor. You are standing in a place that may not be that old, but it has gone through such violent catastrophe. That's just the nature of change. You know, if you want to change, terraform, truly terraform from a creator originator perspective, you go in and you melt. Nothing can withstand whatever. So if it's great heat or plasma or modification of something, that, well, then so be it if that's necessary. I have witnessed many different places. I've seen places in South America and Central America, so-called Central America and South America, where the land, and you can see some of these in the North American West, the land looks like it was pushed upward, as if, you know, when you crumple up, push a sheet or a spread across a bed, and it crumples and keeps crumpling and pushing as it hits more furrows or wrinkles, and then it just pushes up and creates this accordion look, and then it freezes or it becomes solidified. What could solidify something like that in it? And there are so-called experts, geological experts will tell you this is not a matter of millions, as you're taught to believe, millions of years of change. They will tell you this is basically like an overnight occurrence. We're talking catastrophe in minutes, in days.
And then everything is just it's a whole grid of buildings that are more so like components on a motherboard, and they just go up in smoke essentially. Well, they get burned into moltenness, and I guess everybody just gets solidified. Well, not solidified. They get molded into the rock. All the people that live in it, they get fused in it with the heat. I guess that's from what's causing the meltdown. I guess I wanted to know, like how like is it just like any typical meltdown, like somehow, you know, the heat, the power source isn't regulated, and then, you know, the motherboard just fries because it's not being there's no heat sink, like as you would say, that's there to cool it off.
Well, the heat sink and the ways to cool off what we see, what we know from so-called science, is water. And you see the same. Remember, I always say as a rule, if you are confused or something is daunting and you can't just fathom it, turn inward. Look at the processes within yourself and often, or so-called nature, and you can often get your answers from that because they are close or they mimic, and that will tell you how. When you are hot inside, your fluids cool you down. So if something is hot, you've seen so-called molten rock or lava get cooled down when it hits the sea. So water is the number one component for cooling things down. Air, second, you know, the wind or the breeze, but often if it's that hot and there's flame, that just fan the flame and create more fire, make something hotter. But water will help something break down, or not break down, but cool down. And then of course we get steam, and then of course we get the repeat process. So water is not going anywhere, nor is air. These elements, if you haven't noticed, they are the true sustainability. So it's a built-in, ongoing, self-sustaining mechanism. And as far as the borders are concerned, the borders are natural, meaning a mountain range is a border, not a line drawn on a map. But what occurs when there are places that you are not to see, the factions that maintain a so-called government over the people in that area, or especially the people who come to that area, or the aboriginals, the children of the aboriginals who they've wiped clean in the sense of their memories, they will then hide the artifacts, the buildings, etc. And one of the best ways to hide something is to either flood it out using an element, using water, or using their cousins, their relatives. We saw that in the 30s with the WPA, and we see that today. They flooded out many of the Shemitic towns and Hamitic towns, but primarily the Shemitic towns, what you call so-called Negro towns. North Carolina is replete with flooded towns. Or they'll just move in their own people and put them on those lands. And to this day, I know people who have been paid just to not do anything, just to stay there, and it becomes generational. So they just stay there. There's always a house there, a farmhouse there, but they'll never move. You can go to Tennessee, especially in the Smoky Mountain region, so-called Smoky Mountain region, and there are areas where they're part of the Appalachian Trail, which is supposedly public, but you can't get in there. They'll have people living in the park of a so-called white nature or bloodline, and mind you, there's no such thing as a white bloodline, but of a mutant bloodline, and they will be on that land, and that will be their land. They have a deed to it. You can look on the plot maps, and you'll see these last names there. Their last name will be there. But if you are able to actually get around them, you find there are many things being hidden, from oil reserves to gold to old temples. I've actually went hiking with one of my students with the client, three of us, and I showed them an actual temple. They couldn't believe it at first, and I wouldn't either if someone were to take me to a place in Tennessee, and there's an actual temple. There was the so-called local who lived there, and he told us that he saw temples and he could take us there, like altars, etc. And as soon as he was about to take us there, someone in a trailer called him over, and he left his bike. We waited for almost a half an hour. They literally called him over because they didn't want him taking us to see these altars. But we ended up finding more than just the altars. They're there. It's not like it's hidden. It's only hidden in the fact that who goes to the Appalachian Trail to go to the Blue Ridge and then take a little turn off the road. Of course, you have to be very careful. Go in a large group. Be weaponized, because just like the movies, you never know what you're going to encounter. But it's not like that bad. The movies are there to scare you off, but don't go alone in any case. But we found a temple, and that temple overlooks a lake. It's covered in grass, no different than the temples you find, the so-called Mayan temples you would find in Guatemala, so-called Guatemala, and Central America, which is actually North America. But you could find them, but you would never know just by walking by it, nor by being overhead. It would just come across as a dense thicket. You would not see it. That's how so-called nature is. It will overcome, and then either, if it can break it down, it will break it down. Otherwise, it will make it part of itself. So these mountains, these hills, these foothills, they're probably buildings at one time. Why it will not occur to that degree to the buildings you see today, which are deliberately built temporarily, these huge motherboard-looking buildings. Notice they don't look like the buildings of the past, and they could not stand or withstand what the past edifices went through. These things are made temporary. The houses you're in temporary. You don't believe it? Look at a tsunami and watch how, just look at all the stuff that comes flooding through. It's all styrofoam and plastic and composite wood. It's disgusting, but it's done deliberately. There's no accident. Your home should be made of stone and adobe. It should be there to last. So when you go, if you don't give it to a family member, someone else can come in and live in it. And I don't mean like a Flintstone stone. I mean, literally civilized stone house. And you, of course, you can have part wood, etc. But what you are living in, pardon me, is more than likely deliberately temporary. It is to be destroyed, like the homes you see in Nevada that they use for testing so-called atom bombs.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you look at World War II and you look at Cologne, Germany, I mean, the whole Cologne was destroyed except for the Munster. And for whatever reason, they used they maintained the Munster, that main building right across from the train station. They call it a church now or whatever. And it was definitely it looks burned, and it's definitely part of a grid system. And I mean, if you go to the Americas and you look at places like Port Gibson or Tuscaloosa, Alabama, you see structures that look Roman. I mean, they have the columns and everything like that. So I think the timeline thing I feel like gets lost sometimes with the architecture because I think people just have this assumption that certain buildings are from a certain time and they took this amount of years to build or what have you. And my question, I guess, with the timeline, it comes from like, okay, biblically, you have, the fall of Adam, and then, obviously there's like men of renown. There's these angels that crossbreed and make hybrids, and then things have to reset because wickedness reaches an all-time high. And I look at it like, I mean, I've read, in the Apocrypha, it talks about Lamech, Noah's father. When he had Noah, they said Noah came out white as snow, and had a red nose, or red as as a nose. And I just wanted to know, I guess, like the process of like this collapse from Adam, this reset that happened from Adam, and then there's another collapse around when Noah grows, and then so things are breaking down more and more. The genome is breaking down more and more, and then you have a figure like Moses, a patriarch like Moses that comes and delivers these commandments. And from my research, Mount Sinai is in Utah, and I guess he would eventually go across the Red Sea, which would be like into California, and these like I've read so many different like accounts, I guess, of like people saying different things like about the nature of these people. Because like I've heard that people say that Moses was the one that gathered the mutants to I guess to bring down Egypt, to bring down I guess whatever the empire was at the time, and they came in the form of, they continued to come in different forms, like whether they were the Greeks, the Romans, or the Phoenicians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Persians, the Arabs. Like these are just like mutants that were, I guess, spawned from Moses. And I just want to know, like, can you even look at people like what is the nature of some of these people, like, and like you were talking about, like it's like Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and like you were talking about the eukaryotic and the archaea and the prokaryotic. Like, does that mean like the Shema are the eukaryotic, and the Hamites are the archaea, and the Japhethites are the prokaryotic? Is it like that?
A good analogy there. I definitely like that. Now, the connection between the three. But you notice these three breakdowns, or three categories, categorical breakdowns. You have, as you mentioned, eukaryotic, archaea, and prokaryotic. Well, which one is the oldest? So if we look at the three patriarchs, the three brothers, which one is the oldest? Which one is the youngest? And would that fit with this three domain model? Some scientists, or so-called researchers, scientists, say that the archaea is the oldest, and that the second would be the eukaryotic, and then of course the prokaryotic. Those are your single-celled, no nucleus having creatures, bacteria. And then the archaea are the celled. They're not like the bacteria, and they're often found in extreme environments. Would that be like the tundra, or would that be volcanic areas? Well, volcanic areas are not necessarily extreme, but tundric areas are. When you think of Siberia, so and you find archaea in Siberia. Eukaryotic are seasonal. They can go from tropical to wintry. Prokaryotic, kind of the same up to a degree. They primarily are temperate to tropical, and then of course, in some extremes. So very astute analogy that you made there with the three uh, correlating to the three brothers, and then of course the bloodlines from whence they came.
Yeah, because I remember listening to a podcast of yours some time ago, and it was, I mean, this was years ago, and you were talking about Japheth going to an altar and altering his seed for, I guess, some type of benefit or something. And then I go back and I'm studying the Bible and reading it in Hebrew, and it's just talking about the tents, or that Japheth will grow large in the tents of Shem, and I just wonder, like, what is happening here as far as that, like. Is that the analogy of Moses? Like Moses is like, all right, I'm gonna teach these Japhethites, these mutants, and I'm just gonna unleash them on the world. Like what exactly is happening, I guess, in that process? Like, because it looks as though the usurpation of the identity of the Aboriginal or God's people, what have you, has been done publicly by the Japhethites, by these Eastern Europeans that masquerade as the chosen people. And I would assume that that's Gog and Magog. And I just wanted to know, I guess, like, is Moses like, what is his character in all of this? And why did Japheth give up or do something to his seed like that?
That would be Moses' ultimate revenge on the Hamites, to unleash. But at the same time, it would devastate his own people. Maybe that's the reason why one of the signature signs of Hamitic civilizations has always been a great wall, some type of large wall, from the Benin Wall to the so-called Great Wall to the walls you find throughout the Americas. The Puebloan structures, those so-called Pueblo people structures. These are large walls, long walls, usually built to keep out something or someone.
Yeah, there's a wall that goes up all the length of California. I remember I had a California history teacher that was teaching us about it. There's a whole wall.
The Jericho Wall.
Yeah, and Jericho is the Philistines, right? And that's Canaan.
Exactly. And who brought down Jericho's wall? Yeshua. Not to be confused with what people call Jesus or Jesus or Jesus. That's the story itself.
Because Joshua takes over after Moses as the next patriarch.
Correct. After Moses, Moshe, and Aaron, comes the next in line patriarch. That would be Yeshua.
So, like, when it comes to Shem, from the etymology of the word, I'm doing my best here. Like the so-called Jews of today call Yad He Vahe or Yad He Wahe or Yohiwa, what have you. They call that, when they read that, they call it Hashem, like the name. So I always wonder, like, is Shem mean the name? And then I see Shemin or Shemuin, or however you want to look at it, means oil in Hebrew. And I talked to you before, I guess, about people that have the oil, I guess the essence or the spark, the light of the originals, like it's that oil. And I just want to know if like there's a connection there between that name. It's like Shem means these are the people of the oil, like the anointed, or am I just getting my wires crossed here with the names? Like, because I'm sorry.
No, continue.
No, I was gonna say because there's no vowels. So a lot of times I'm just like, man, these words are structured so similar. I feel like they have to have some type of core branch. I don't like there's a cognate there, and I just figured like just from my best guess that this is what the word Shem means, like those of the oil of the anointed, like and um and I just wanted to know if that's what that meant. Because just to call him name doesn't really make sense to me. Like Shem just means name, I guess in popular, modern Hebrew, it just means name. And it's just like this can't be the end of that. I felt like that I don't know. I just felt like there was more to it than just calling him that. Shem had to have a bigger definition than I felt than just name. But
Well, remember that's the etymological version, which means this is for a particular purpose within a particular lexicon. And then you have to take apart name. Name meaning moniker, meaning logos. So name has a very important purpose. Uh, when you think of logos or logo, you also think of so-called God, right?
yeah, I mean, as far as Greek etymology, yeah.
So the closest to God would be the name in this instance, and so it's not just name. If you look at just the breakdowns of the name, so-called name or moniker of Shem or Sehem, or there are few, and they're not always the same. We don't just go at the so-called Hebrew and who else did you mention? Um, I think you mentioned one other group. Did you mention Arabic?
As far as the people that Moses, the mutant classes that Moses had developed.
And the groups that had some affiliation with the Shemitic people, so-called Shemitic people. The name is different. If you're looking at modern Hebrew, which is not Proto-Hebrew or
Yeah,
Paleo-Hebrew, totally different. They would say Sechem or Stem, and then you can't just skip over and go right to Arabic. You've got to go to Akkadian, and Akkadian is Hushumu. And then you can go to Arabic, which is Ishim. You can't just skip over, and you notice they're all different. So are we to focus on that, or are we to focus on what it actually means? Well, based on the so-called cultures of the day, that then and even now, the name or the moniker was more than just every pot has a handle. Your name connected you to a bloodline, and your name connected to there was always a naming ceremony. So your name went with that, pardon this might offend people, with that spirit or programming that you were to be imbued with. This might sound horrific to some, that you had children with a purpose. What does that mean? If you look at that statement, you might read it incorrectly. That meant that the purpose had to be embedded because the people needed it. You were in a so-called community, and what the community needed, or that family community needed, it would be imbued into you. So you had a spirit purpose, and it was shown by your name. So it wasn't just every pot has a handle, like today. Just name anybody anything, and or what you like. How vain, how illogical.
it's just like Schumacher or something like that, but I guess maybe even more in depth because it's like it's the same way you would.
Correct.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah, correct. Exactly. Schumacher would be used as a surname, but what went with it? And surnames, they were used in some so-called societies and not in others, because you could tell a lot from first name. Many of your characteristics or attributes would be imbued into you or in you because they mirrored either your your progenitors, your fathers, typically, because it's the father that not only determines the gender and sex of the offspring, but also determines the purpose. Up until the so-called middle 20th century, you might even see this reflected in novel and book and saga and so-called movie, where if the father character would be upset if the son or the daughter did, especially the son, if did not follow in his footsteps. In fact, many of you know people in your family, maybe even yours, where you followed in your father's footsteps. You either took over a family business or you did exactly what your father did. You might have gone off on a tangent, but then you came right back.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think the name is very important. I mean, it's like you name a screwdriver, and a hammer. It's like, it's not supposed to be an arbitrary name. It's supposed to be designated for that thing. So
Shem
it's the essence.
is more closely related to purpose than it is to name. And then if name is associated with the originator creator, then that purpose would mean Shem is to carry out the purpose of the originator creator, which would be the law. That's why Shemitic people have the law in their cerebral and in their so-called heart, their diffusion. So, when you think of diffusion, you think of everything all combined, a mix of things. So the law is in both, and therefore they are to uphold a certain way of living. If they don't, the punishment is greater on them, if you will, and it comes from within and from without. So in other words, they know better. Remember I mentioned to you in private, I said it's like being the older sibling. You're going to be punished for many things if you go off chart and lead others astray. They're looking for you, they're going to copy you, but you also know better because you're closer to, you're the namesake. And that's what you see in these names. And therefore, Shemitic people have within them, not a little box on their head like some have to put. You mentioned about people who are the actual imposters. They have to put something on and carry a little, Methuselah or whatever the term is, and they have to put these things on them to tell the world, okay, this is what they are when they are not. The true people have it written within them, whether they like it or not, and most of them don't like it because that what comes with it is a great responsibility. You can't do what everyone else does. You are not to drink alcohol. You're not to do such and such with your hair. You're not to do things. But they're like, no, I want to do this. And think of it, like I said, the older sibling, they want to have fun like the mid kid or the younger kid. And the meso, the endo, okay? They want to do that. And you're not supposed to. You have a greater responsibility and you just don't want to admit to it and don't want to see it. Well, you get what comes to you. And don't we see that with the so-called Negro group? When they take on something of a inappropriate nature, they go to the nth degree. I remember someone saying that when a person who is so-called Negro drinks, they get everything that comes with the bad things that come with alcoholism. The cirrhosis of the liver, the shakes, you name it, all of it. And scientific stats prove that. So if I were to say this to a so-called black person, they would be highly upset, thinking, oh, you're not going to take my alcohol from me. Well, you're not supposed to be drinking it. It's not for you. It's literally not for anyone. But you're supposed to be the example. And we see today the world copies the Negro in every damn thing, but it's all the bad things. Because we really do bad. You copy your older brother.
Yeah, the older brother is there.
Copy your older sister.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the older brother is there with the parents early, and then he's only really learning how to be an adult. Whereas, like, the kids watch other kids because there's other kids around, but the first one is really just growing up with the parents around, learning how to be an adult. And
Correct.
so, like, when it comes to the Shemites, like, as far as like the definitions of a eukaryote or eukaryotic cell, it's like this is a cell that has a nucleus. archaea and prokaryotic, they have no nucleus. So, like, essentially, you're saying there's no core, or there's something not there, I guess.
They have a spirit, and that spirit can be programmed, and so they're constantly looking for guidance. And so that's what the eukaryotic is there for, to be that guide, if you will, or the energy that exists around them and everything else. From that, this is how we shape the world. This is how all of us shape the world, and you're taught nothing about it. You're taught that you just come and go, and whatever you do, you do. But we all shape this place, and we shape many more things than just that. If we recognize it, would we change? For example, would a male change his habit and stop masturbating if he knew that he carried the seed of life? No, probably not, because of the nature of this place, which is to, if you allow it, if you allow yourself, I'm not going to blame the place. If you allow yourself to do it, you will overindulge. This place gives what it gives and takes what it takes. You can't destroy it, but you will be destroyed if you allow yourself to be destroyed. But you have to recognize who you are, recognize the hierarchy in yourself, outside yourself, and get rid of all these isms that tell you, okay, these people and this person cannot be the older brother and the older. No way. Get rid of all that stuff that's stifling all this time. It's going to happen whether you do it or not. Like catastrophe comes, and we call it catastrophe, but it's just changing. The place has to change. You just have to know where to be and where not to be. Animals know it, but why don't you know it? You're supposed to be better than an animal or smarter than an animal. Well, then prove it.
So when it comes to Japheth and Ham, these people initially were melanated peoples. I would assume that they have features that, yeah.
Correct.
So Japheth in the beginning, he's a melanated being, and for whatever reason, he does something to his seed for some benefit, I guess, of vanity, what have you. I don't know. I guess because like the etymology of Japheth is right. I don't know if it's true, but it says abundance or like a lot. I guess like just enlarged. And I just wonder, like, through that dilution of enlargement, like that's what I guess produced these open vessels that are, I guess, Paleophytites that are, Eastern Europeans, Khazarians, what have you. And then I just want to know, I guess, at some point there has to be some crossing there. And like it's like you got the Hamites, they have the Canaanites, which are like an inbred offshoot of Ham that I guess ultimately, like with any mammal, if it inbreeds, it suffers leucism or albinism, what have you, and it loses color as it does that. And so I was assuming that, yeah. And then the same thing with the Japhethite, I guess well, even today, the Japhethites or the Khazarians, they only breed with a certain group. So I'm assuming that they're inbreeding and keeping themselves pale. And then you have Edom, which is Israel's brother. Where did Edom come from? And is he still considered a Shemite? Like, because like at some point I guess I'm assuming that there's a merger that makes like an ultimate chimera where you got these recessive Japhethites, these recessive Hamites through Canaan, and then Edom, I guess once they inbreed with and then crossbreed with Canaan, it's like this unholy trinity there of the recessives of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and it creates this totally anti-life class of human-like creature. And I guess like I'm ultimately asking, like, when that creature is created, and then you have Shemites either through getting raped or through vanity crossing with that type of creature, or these recessive creatures of any nature, what does that do to the Shemite? because you were talking about it the other day, like you said the term you used was diffusion, and I wanted to know, I guess, like what exactly, what does that entail? What does that look like? Because you were telling me that 12%, well, like 12% of the population of USA is so-called black, and I don't know how many percent of them is hybrid Aboriginals or just mostly just Aboriginals, or how many of them I don't know what are the makeups, the bloodlines that they come from, but I just want to know, I guess, like what the diffusion process is, that what made them to where they're at this 12% state, or like, or what does that look like when a person mates with a recessive like that? What does diffusion mean to you? Like, I know what it means as far as like a diffuser, but what does it mean like through a human experience or a man experience?
Well, let's look at a diffuser. You take one drop of pure essential oil and you put it into water, and that's just one drop. But that one drop does make a difference. You can tell there's something in that water. If you use it, regardless whether you use a cold diffuser or a heated diffuser, obviously you'll get different results if you want the heat. But when you diffuse something, it can take over or not. Over time, what occurs? We're not talking about a diffuser now. What occurs? I guess this is where you can say the one drop, so-called one drop rule comes into play. That everyone I just read up on that, which was practiced and still is practiced. They have stopped. It still is practiced. You know, you hear in the rhetoric, but if you don't know how to listen logically and critically, you miss it. For example, this is from a few years ago when that gentleman Barack Hussein Obama was president of the U.S. They would call him, first black president. Well, wait a minute. Why is he the first black president? Like, because he's half black, half white. Well, if he's half black, he's also half white. So why can't we just call him the white president? Because he is. It's because he's got just one drop, and that's all that it takes to make you so-called black. And they're not talking about your so-called phenotype or your surface, although that might play a role in it. They're talking, and it doesn't really, but they're talking about, when I say they, pardon me, they're talking about what the potential is, the seed line is, the potential for it to rise through and up and out, meaning your words, your actions now are of your progenitor. You're not going to stand for this. You might be the enemy. You might be the one who unseats. And that's what they're talking about when they say one drop rule.
So do they have access to a core, or how does that work? Because you're talking about like these individuals that were this like heirloom seed, just like a man heirloom seed. Like when you cross that with something else, does the offspring of that have access to a core? Do they have their own core, or what is the like? I guess what is the product? Is it inevitable that this is going to create just more dilution, or do some people say,
Well,
"All right, I'm never going to"?
it does over a particular epoch or period of timing, and then things reshuffle. So we're not vegetables. We are not little sheep. Even though we are multi-celled and complex, we're not flowers. These are or microorganisms. All of these things that I just named are examples of life forms that have been altered in labs, uh, so-called successfully, and I'm sure it has been done to so-called mankind and man and human. In many ways, it's already done. It's in our faces. So, it's done when we hear the genome, so-called genome project. So they're already releasing, when I say they, through the media and the research labs that are participating in this, like Stanford University, they will tell you, their spokespeople will tell you that certain things have already been done and they're successful. Now, there's a period of time think of it in terms of like radiation. Radiation has a certain type of life form, or not life form, but lifespan, if you will. And during that lifespan, things degrade or change, and then you have something else. Remember, you're told that energy doesn't go away. And
Yeah.
being very simple.
Thermodynamics.
Well, all of that can be measured. It's not like entropy, the so-called entropy. They won't even tell you the truth about that. All of these things can be measured and are measured. So we know the timing for, this is the thing that they didn't know to a certain degree. And that thing that they didn't know, what was the timing? They know now. When I say they, those in the upper echelon, and probably knew for a long time, the timing for core change or core recidivism. Looking at your example, you have a person who's been diluted. Let's go over to Australia, and many of the Aboriginals there have been diluted deliberately. You see that, and it's no different than any other place. You just think, oh, that happened just there. No, the dilution happened all over the place.
Did you just
going to be
step in front of the microphone?
Pardon?
Is the microphone covered or something now?
No, not at all.
It's just, I don't know if it's glitching for other people. I can hear you pretty good. I don't know if it's glitching for other people. If somebody in the chat would comment, let me know if they can hear Pharaoh well. Let me know. It kind of got muffled for me. I can still hear it, but it's not the same quality. As soon as you start talking about the Aboriginals of Australia, it kind of muffled. So anybody in the chat, let me know if Pharaoh is muffled. It's glitching.
It's glitching.
Okay. I guess if you
I'm just reseating the microphone. I didn't move. I did that deliberately because I wanted to avoid any problems. But how about glitching a bit, cutting in and out? Okay. I'm reseating the mic just to see if that will help. Okay. Now?
Yeah, I'm gonna put the headphones in real quick. I think just for me to hear it, because the one person said they can hear you. So I mean, I'm gonna just get my headphones.
It's been doing it the whole time. Wow. Wow. Remember when you interviewed me on Discord? The same thing happened, and you thought that I had edited our voices. No, I had to piece together what was left over because it sounded weird. You would ask questions and I wasn't heard. And so it would go to the next question, but it sounded like you were just talking to yourself, and then you would hear my answer. So it looks like it's doing it again, but this is different. I'm at a different location, a better connection, and different equipment. All right. So
All right.
I should sound much better. How is it sounding?
I hear you good in the headphones.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if other people still hear it, but I guess if you speak, then
Okay.
they should let us know.
I kept a note of where you left off, so that just in case if this was a way to divert from the topic, I know where we left off. I've got a memory for that. Is it okay to continue? Is it smooth? I'm asking your audience.
Do you guys hear Pharaoh correctly? His sound is breaking up a bit. It sounds better now to some people.
Enough.
All right. All right.
As I was saying,
Yeah, they said
many of you have probably still the same.
They said it's good now.
Okay, good. All right. Many of you might have seen a movie or a meme. I knew about it before the meme became popular, but there's a movie, I don't know the name. And there's a man giving a lecture presentation. This is occurring at the, I presume, early 20th century, perhaps so-called turn of the century, or the so-called century. And he's talking in front of a group of his peers. In other words, they look like him. They are from the same bloodline. This mimics another film about the so-called 18th century, when someone makes this dig at this woman sitting around a table. She's the only one that looks like her, but she's kind of a little darker than the so-called Meghan Markle type, and everyone else is pale, but then there's a woman next to her. She's also quite shocked. But this man makes this remark about, if no one, if she, meaning, implying that if this woman doesn't give it up, he'll take it. And then, in other words, wiping her out and her bloodline out by basically going in on her sexually and making her beget his seed. And in the other film that supposedly occurs centuries later in, I presume, Australia, this man is showing how you convert and wipe out a certain bloodline by weeding them out. In fact, the meme goes, if we can't weed them out, we'll breed them out.
Is this like rabbit-proof fence?
Exactly. And
Yeah, right. Yeah.
this is a model that has been done. It's in your Bible even. We can't weed them out, we'll breed them out. Well, you ask yourself, well, wait a minute, if they're all melanated, what are you talking about? Well, that's what happened. And so you had, now who was the first to do it? Was it Shem or Ham or Cam or Ham? Who was the first? According to what we see around the world, it would have to be Ham. Many of you have relatives, male relatives in your family who have a ton of children all over the place. That's a very Hamitic mentality. They might have an Asian woman and a so-called black woman or Shemitic woman or Hamitic woman, all various types of females, and they impregnated all of them. As opposed to having women from his own seed line, in the sense of, not his cousins or sisters, I mean from his own bloodline that he could relate to and impregnate. And no, they prefer to spread it. You hear it in the language, oh, I have no problem with any woman, I'm international. Yes, that's the nature of most men, they will, but those who obey the laws of the world that were set in motion to avoid all this confusion know that you don't do that. Polygamy is one thing, but you have polygamy within. You see the story. Solomon, who was it? Who did that? He had many different wives of many different bloodlines. It didn't work out too well in the end. In his epic, everything works out in the end, but it didn't work out within that frame. And what is that frame? That frame is 70 and 700. So after 700 years, the core comes back to its original form. So all it takes, if you're within that time span, you might not be you. It could be you, depending on who came before you, and that's probably why you are the way you are. Or it could be your offspring. But it's 70 and 700. So within that time frame, a lot of things go on. You can see a so-called mutant with straight hair or tow-colored hair and hollow hair and so-called Nordic features go from that, as long as they're not practicing inbreeding, and then become Hamitic. Or you see it today in a so-called Eurasian, someone who might have a Chinese father and an Irish mother, and you see this. Wait, something just stands out. The eyes are different. Well, when that child, if depending on who they mate with, one of those bloodline features will be wiped out, and then next, but there's still within them the seed portions of their progenitors. because you have many progenitors, but that particular core is still there. And then that will vanish in 70 or become, not vanish, it will become inert, or what we
And that's
call dormant.
so looking at the timeline like that. No, yeah, we spoke before about Genghis Khan being a Khanite and the Han Chinese being the Khan or the Han or the Ham or the Khan, however you want to look at it. It's a Hamite. Like the horde was supposedly founded in the early 1200s. So
Is that
if we're looking
the
at
Mongol horde or Mongols horde?
the Mongol Empire, supposedly was founded in 1206. And I'm trying to like line this up. Like if 1206 is when the Canaanites or the Canaanites were really starting to come into their own, is the fall of Rome or so-called Rome, is that like a, a coincidence? I guess you could say, like in a literal term, like is that coinciding? Like the Mongols, the Canaanites get so big from the 1200s into the 1400s, which is really the 400s, and so then there's this period, I guess, like you're saying, 700 years. I'm just wondering if that's like somewhere in that time frame, 700 years from this threshold where the parasites are getting such a large toehold in the realm that 700 years of dilution, I guess, from that point is like kind of where we are now.
And so that's why you see a proliferation of a certain bloodline and not of others, especially in centralized zones or places. What you see is not what you often get. You have to actually travel and you'll see, and then you can verify, confirm and verify. But you'll notice that if you make places inhospitable to certain groups that don't bear the semblance of those that are acceptable, like a facial passport, then you make things so that they don't want to come there. You can go to places in so-called Europe or certain places in so-called Asia and have, let's say, phenotypical features, so-called phenotypical features of someone from Namibia, and you might be accepted, no problem. But you then come from, let's say, Chicago, and go there, you might get cold shoulder. Or let's say you come from Nigeria, you might get a cold shoulder. So you say, well, wait, why does the person from Namibia get treated well and the person from Nigeria not? People know who is who. And you probably experienced that when you go to places. You see a variance of looks, but people know who they are, who is not, who is a visitor. You can even dress like the local. If you're not egregiously out of line, maybe the hair texture, but then if you put a hat on, okay? But if you're extremely tall and that's an abnormal sight, then yeah, you stand out. Or if and hair texture is one given, that's definitely a clear sign. One of the things that you see today. What are the Shemitic people doing, and some of the Hamitic people doing as well? What do? They change the texture of their hair, or they put on a wig if they're female, or they put in a weave. They do all of these various things that hide their true self or true so-called identity. Why? You have to study this is vestigial behavior from the past, carrying on into the now. And that vestigial behavior was, okay, you could be killed for looking like the way you do. So therefore, change this. It has nothing to do with self-hate. It has to do with the fact that you're trying to accommodate the people who are of the hegemony or of the empire, and you want to fit in. You can obviously, you're not changing yourself There are people who actually do. They bleach out the dermis of the dermal layer of the skin cells, and then they bleach the melanin, strip it through bleaching creams and bleaching ointments, etc. And some put pills in to take away their natural communicative process with sun and soil, which is silly. Obviously these are illogical acts, but this is what was done. It's nothing new. People would cloak themselves in order to be hidden, in order to get in. The mutants or so-called white people had to do that too for a time. You could be beaten and pushed out because obviously you stood out. So they had to cover themselves. Lepers too. People saw a leper, they ran. People saw a mutant or an albino, they may not have run, but they could have stoned them or told the law. They did have so-called law or guard or whatever on the streets then. Not like you see today, but they did. And don't get it twisted in the sense of thinking of a Cecil B. DeMille movie. No, we're talking of modern people, modern times in their own epoch. You're taught that you came from a starting point and now you are here today. That might be for some, but not for all. And it's the reason why you have these so-called mysteries and these so-called documentary films claiming, oh, we don't know how they built it and we can't mimic it today, but it clearly shows signs of intelligent life or intelligent machinery. Where did they get it? Who built it? And then, of course, you have this illogical conclusions which don't fit any premise, saying, oh, it was done by aliens, or they don't say anything at all. Why? Because if we were to say that it came from so-called melanated people, that would break the mode. That would take away the stigma. That's why slavery was put upon the so-called Negro, because there is a stigma to it. No one wants to be the offspring of a slave. However, embedded in the name slave is Slav, and so that tells you the Negro was never a slave. They were prisoners of war, but never a slave. Indebted, yeah, because you have to pay off the debt. So the true slave, and if you like, I can tell you where they came from and why they were enslaved. It's very basic, but yes. So all of these various mixtures based on societal rules or empire rules changed how people treated themselves and their very core. You see it in the mentality of many mothers. They want to protect their children from what they think is to come, so they have them do certain things. And that's where fathers are supposed to step in and tell her step back. You don't do that, but we're in a matriarchy, so you don't see that. You have many people across the board, especially the so-called Negro, where they're telling you, be quiet, keep your head down, just come home in one piece, don't do this, don't anger. What is that mirror image of? No one questions. You're not supposed to question. That's why you're inundated with encumbrances, so you can't think, you can't question. But nothing on the surface fits what is supposed to be, and nothing on the surface fits the way we are supposed to live. All of these things that you pointed out historically, all leading up to today, but again, they're nothing new. So regardless of who is in the control seat, so-called control seat, it all has the same effect.
So you were telling me that obviously some people would like I guess you could crossbreed, you could rape, you could try to manipulate to try to coerce the people that have a core to do your bidding, to do the things that you wish to manifest, but you never really have access to it. It's not something that you can actually touch. It's like an arbiter, I guess, or like just something that's not touching the physical. So that
most you can do, it's like if you wanted to, you see, okay, I'm going to just name names, but pardon me if it offends anyone or if you're related to them. Let's look at Sammy Sosa. Sammy Sosa, and this is not just pointing him out. This is many people. I'm pointing him out because he comes from a so-called culture that practices this. Pardon the so-called Latino culture, but I can say it. So this is not to just put anyone down. But Sammy Sosa is not what you think. If you look at him today, he doesn't look anything like he did before he made these so-called changes. He is not going to change his genetics at all. But what he did is change his countenance now. That does nothing. So what's going to happen with the children? They're going to look like the original Sammy Sosa, even though his wife looks nothing like his people. But here's where illogical activities and actions really screw you up if you're not wise. And most people don't practice wisdom. He has no clue the true. I mean, maybe he does. I don't know. Maybe he did do an in-depth search on his wife's background. But even though she has the straight hair and she has the mutant skin, he still doesn't know her core or from when she came, because damn, if they have a child and she has the core of an original, the baby's going to come out looking like original Sammy Sosa.
Yeah, I mean, because it's just
yourself in the now. It does nothing for yourself. So what does that mean to your question, your query? It means that when someone does something to contain or maintain, a competitive edge over a people, you have to do you have to do certain things that will ensure it. One, wipe out and control the remaining male line, meaning wipe out most and control the remaining or remnant male line to the degree where they will wipe out and maintain themselves. Confuse the female line if they have any, and females have allegiance to their male. You have to do certain things to get them where they become the enemy to their own males, because females were designed to support the male and submit to the male. But you put certain things in the indoctrinating cycle. You start when they're children. Yes, you can indoctrinate adults too. This will maintain a competitive edge over people and make sure that you are in the control seat, because now the guides, the teachers, the leaders, the males are pretty much inundated and with all the wrong data, and they're going in the direction that you can probably guide and direct. We see that with the so-called pop culture today, which would include the so-called music of rap and the media and everything else. You see people who are doing things like, well, wait, why are they doing these things to themselves? It's to maintain the hegemony, the status quo.
and so, like you were,
Go ahead.
no, I was just saying, like you were saying that it's like when people get an organ transplant, they have to take these drugs in order to like force their body to accept the organ or whatever it is, and that's pretty much, yeah, not rejected. So it's like an autoimmune response in the system.
Right. Well, we're in an entire the existence of man, human, or mankind and human. We're all in a soup of rejection, if you will, and so we sustain ourselves basically by taking anti-rejection substances and doing anti-rejection action, because the world around you, which cleanses itself. Don't be fooled by all of the so-called experts that claim this place is going downhill as a result of global warming, et cetera, et cetera. No, what you end up doing is just screwing up your own backyard. This plane, this realm is built to maintain, and there's nothing you or anyone else can do about it. However, in our little pocket, yeah, you can screw that up. It looks big, but it's a little pocket. And this is what's happening. and has happened. But even in that little pocket, it can be cleansed. So yes, we are basically living in a discombobulated place, which you have heard me say before, and we're ingesting anti-rejection medication or meds in many different ways, through ideology, through being told what to think, being force-fed, if in a sense, the things that are detrimental to life and life to come, for the purposes of what? No different than the purposes of keeping one group of people, in this case, the Shemitic people, in line, because the fact that if we let them out of line, then they will eventually, when that time frame matches, getting to that 700-year point, they will automatically guide everyone who is willing and ready out of that mire. We have to keep them at their side, at your side, at their side, and at the same time, kind of like a Nicholas and what is it, Black Pete, Schwarz Pete. You keep them at your side, and they will always serve you and do what you want. Get the little kids and put them in the bag, and you can eat them. So that's basically, if you can picture it, that's what's going on. So you have the pulse of the world in check, and that way you can maintain a parasitic hold. No different than the parasites in your gut. We have to keep you doing the same thing so that you will continually eat the way you eat, even when you think you've changed the way you're doing it. There are many different ways to keep you parasitically infested, or to make you the perfect host.
And then so they manipulate the grids of the body, and so like you were talking about some time ago about like the God grids, that are being laid down on top of, I guess, the natural God grid or ley lines. Because you were talking about how every city or every town has like a heat sink or a place where when you have people getting slain, like, so-called black on black crime, the energy is getting funneled through these different pockets of the place. Like, that's why I brought up the Munster in Cologne, Germany. It's like, yeah, they knew they destroyed the whole city, but they preserved this building that is used as some sort of conduit. And I was just, I like, as far as so-called black on black crime, this whole grid is set up, I guess, and there's more grids being laid down, like lattices, I guess, like, but when you have these melanated peoples that don't know where they come from, I think innately at some level, it might be subconscious, they do know that they're from different tribes or nations. And then I guess it plays out in different ways where you have, all the killing that you have in Chicago and Philadelphia, New Orleans, places like that. Is it just like the same old loop? Like, is it just an infinite loop of these same spirits and beings killing each other, or you're just infinitely getting killed by the same being that is, maybe not even supposed to be in this part of the natural grid, but since like you're in this cell kind of like, and you just constantly getting ran through this wood chipper in a sense, like, and there's always these buildings or components that are placed, like whether they be churches or, like you said, obelisks, and so people, all these cities are built a certain way, and then you have a gentrification and you have segregation through, it's melanated, but it's also financial, so because it's kind of not separate in that way. And I was just wondering, is that the game? Because they know that they can't, I guess, like you said, they can't access the core, or at least they're trying to keep the melanated people killing each other and destroying themselves as long as they can, while they try to figure out a plan to access that core. And you were saying like that there is a maybe a threshold that they could reach where they might, and that I don't know if it could potentially wipe out the remnant and it'll be just a total reset of the garden or what. But what exactly? I guess you could probably explain this a lot better than the question I'm trying to pose. Is like what what are the signs, or like what are the symptoms and things? Ultimately, I want to ask about the features of the people, but like, what are the symptoms of the stories, like that you could say, like, oh yeah, this is definitely a Hamite and a Shemite. They've been killing each other, or get, the Shemite's been getting killed for however long, millennia, and this story is definitely like kind of patented in a way, and they're just going to keep doing that. And as long as they do that, we'll have them in that cell in the grid while we try to make our way to have access to this core. I guess is that's what's going on, and like what does that? How would you know what's what and who is who?
Well, one of the ways that you're taught is to know by action and of course by word, but primarily action. And then of course beyond both, what you observe. I wouldn't say beyond both, but in addition to both, there's that sense, and that sense, if you want to call it the third sense, is a sense that must be fine-tuned, calibrated, and like a torus field, if you will, so that it can work in tandem with your questions and with your observation skills, so that you're able to determine who's who and who's not. Otherwise, you need a program to do that. And from all of the activities, if you connect the dots, it seems like the so-called echelons of the Vatican and other groups, they may not have had access to translating the program or programs that determine who's who and what's what. This is just right now I am using speculation, because if that is known, that would explain certain things, such as the hype about finding genetic bloodline connection, because it would behoove these people to have that information and then make the comparison based on the books that say, okay, this core is resurfacing on this date. You need to do the following to stop it, or the following will occur.
Because you were telling me that like you were talking about how like you have this reemergence of ignorance, like a certain brand or patented ignorance, as far as the speech and just the overall way a melanated person carries themselves. Like there's certain factions that have, I don't know if it's just like a soul like set. Okay, a program.
These are all
Like it's a
programs.
it's a program that has I guess it's got its cycle, and it's come back through these these different processes, through drill rap, through just the abundance of the display of ignorance, I guess, that is showing you like, okay, this is like a sign that this group is here, or has made a transition into this place. And I'm assuming like by knowing that you get that signal, that's showing you that this other group is now emerging as well. Kind of like the way you were saying, kind of the same way you were saying, like when a famous person that's melanated dies, a parasite also dies as well in a short frame of time, because it's like they come in tandem.
Yeah, the parasite needs a host. So it doesn't matter that the being is past. You have, as I mentioned years ago, parasitic activity on every level. That would be your matter level, physical level, and the unseen level. there's a difference, obviously, in the scope of things and in the purpose, too. So the so-called etheric parasites, they've got their purpose and they've got their target. But it's no different than the parasites here. The only difference is parasites here, they've got more attributes, more avenues to infect. Everything from a doorknob to, food to so-called sexual activity. So much transference going on in this physical realm, which is just typical. But what you were asking before fits with the 7,700. So if you add up the 70, you get what, 140, close to 150, and you have the recidivist pattern happening. And you mentioned something about I think you mentioned some kind of drill rap or something. Well, it goes, I think it's a little bit before that you started to notice, that you should have started to notice the change in the dialect and vernacular of so-called the Shemitic people of the U.S., the so-called Negro of the U.S. And of course, because they are who they are, everyone who has children became followers of rap. And then you started to see, pardon this term, they used it and it didn't hold. The wigger, I don't know if you heard that term before.
Oh, for sure, for sure.
But then you started to see, now you can go to any neighborhood, doesn't have to always be Irish. You go to Italian neighborhoods, you go to so-called Jewish neighborhoods. You can see it in Hasidic neighborhoods, and people are throwing up hand signs and talking as if they just popped out of a Drake video or something. They're literally sounding, but if you're wise and astute, you would recognize that this is a spirit, this is a program. And the difference is, okay, yes, you had your Beastie Boys, but the Beastie Boys didn't sound like they came from Chitlin Switch, Mississippi, although they did sound like they were copying off of so-called black rappers, American rappers. Now,
yeah, for sure.
And you're going to start seeing all these other groups, various groups, bloodlines, sounding as if they came from the deep south. And if you were to ask many of the so-called Negroes or so-called black people or so-called black Americans specifically, where are you from? Guaranteed, most of them will tell you they are not from the South and they've never been in the South. So then why do you sound like you just stepped out of the color purple? This is a spirit. And if you added up 70, it fits. So those who have control over these spirits and programs, they can, remember how I said spirit can be embedded, and you can bring back, and you can, because they're like a virus. And if you look at the prokaryotic and the archaea, especially the archaea, you can program these things. You can create these so-called viruses because their genetic material is there for the taking. It doesn't have a nuke. So in other words, you basically can turn that code into whatever you need to turn it into. And the same follows through for these etheric spirits. You can embed these codes into music, into ideology, and before you know it, you have a particular behavior pattern, you have a speech pattern that goes with it, and it becomes like a contagion or a pathogen or both, and it spreads.
So when it's a program like that, is it stagnation of the program, or the program supposed to just be updating, like kind of how you have programs that update over time and as to not become obsolete? Like, is that what's supposed to be happening? Like, everybody's evolving, the programs are updating, they're going through their process of evolution or update, and that just has been halted, and so now they're just like rogue programs.
Right, and what you get is a deprecation in the programming, in the code, and eventually it will clash with everything else around it, which is dangerous. So
there's a show
now
called Westworld. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
There's a show called Westworld, and the guy, he creates like an AI place for people to go like vacation in, and they lose perception of time and they go like live in the West. And, there's real people in there, and then there's people that are like bots or like programs in it that's a part of it. And so you go into the program, or you go into this virtual reality thing, and then you might have wife and kids, but they're all just programs. And then you meet somebody else, and it might be one of the people in the family is an actual person, and then eventually everybody, the people get lost in there and they forget who's who, and then the guy that made the virtual reality, he has like a clone that's in the virtual reality that usurps him and kills him and takes over the identity of the creator. And I guess that's kind of like, I guess what's happening in some respects. And yeah, I just always wonder, like, what is the why would programs even want to exist if they know they're programs? Like, why would they even not? Why wouldn't they just self-destruct? Like, is it just that the Shemite has to just be on their P's and Q's? They have to have such maintenance of the realm that it just, or they're just going to self-destruct. Like the programs are going to just implode.
Yeah, because no one is guaranteed anything here. The thing about, I say, don't feel down on yourself or don't think someone's better than you. There is no respect of persons in this place. So what can happen to the Shemite or the Shemitic individual? They can succumb to all of these various things that they should know better, and they do know better about, but they just, for whatever reason. No one forces anyone to do the things that they do or participate in the things that they participate. No one makes the colonizer, or so-called colonist. No one makes someone who's a racist. No one makes someone who is a hoe. You do what you do because you do it. You invite these things in.
So when it comes to
pathway, that's the truth is difficult, but when you actually look at it, it's not. And there's a purpose for being here, but you miss that purpose when you go through all these other routes. And if you step outside of that realm, in the sense of how you think, you start to see, well, guess what? Your so-called, what people call God, doesn't give a blank, because you're looking at this so-called God in your own context as a so-called human or man or mankind, and that's not the way that works. Obviously so. You've seen, as I mentioned many times, you can go and see babies in hospitals suffering and dying, and yet someone will say, oh, agnostic or an atheist, say, see, there's no God, because if there was a God, this would be different. Well, the atheist is wrong, because the fact you just say, the fact that you're standing there talking to me tells me there is a so-called God. So you can negate all that crap. But the thing is, stop trying to anthropomorphize these mindsets into a so-called lower, if you will, so-called human state. We think just like you see. We see in a so-called third dimension, and that's it. Unless you're above and can fly like a bird, then you can see down, you can see across. We see what we see. In order to see more, go inward to see more, and that should, and it's supposed to, help you to actually comprehend, which is the purpose, to comprehend what's going on, so that you can really know what these actions are between people and outside of people. And then you recognize, okay, there's a purpose for me being, and there's a purpose and purposes that I must carry out while I'm here. And I must respect the fact that the here that I am in, I can only influence. And then I respect certain things about my actions, my limitations, and the things that are not my limitations. And I recognize that I can go forward beyond the limitation. And it might not occur within my time frame, but it can occur after that through my legacy. But all of these things don't occur in a natural way, because everyone is, not everyone, but a lot of people are encroaching upon others. And that's the whole purpose of chaos. That's the whole purpose of empires. There's always going to be some weak link.
Yeah. So a program does have a will to make choices with.
a program can have a will. That's why I mentioned before with the spirit program, you have very dumb ones, like just an energy format. When I say dumb, again, as I mentioned before, don't let your emotions get to you. The term dumb has been used in many platforms. Okay, a terminal or a monitor can be dumb unless it has a motherboard in it, et cetera, and it can act as an input-output. But the original terminals were just dumb. They didn't have everything else that you see today in a monitor, but it had nothing to do with the emotional side of it or the intellectual side. So a spirit and our program, these are synonymous, can be highly intelligent in the sense of what it is programmed to do or what it is imbued with, or it can just be a facade. You see that in or you sense that in the so-called spirit that comes after, like a pet or a person passes away. Sometimes it's more, it's interactive. But it all depends on what is imbued into it and how is that installation, how is it done? It can be done over your lifetime. It can be done after the fact. Hence the reason why you're warned by those in the know. You're even warned in the scriptures. You're given details or examples of people who did consult with so-called spirits. I think Saul is one example, it's a popular example, that don't consult with that which you cannot see, which makes sense. You have to be wise. You have to be wise when you're purging parasites from yourself. Why? You cannot see them. You can't see what's going on in your gut, but you can sense it. So you know that you have to be wise and strategic when dealing with it. So the same thing with spirits and programs. You've got to be wise and astute.
So when a program goes through this process of evolution, I guess it's like in all things possible through God or through the creator, the originator, like anything is possible, like as far as the evolutionary process, if they were to align themselves with that originator. And I guess like one time I remember you were saying that like I don't know if I'm getting it right, but you were saying like I think you said time is like sound cubed or something to that effect. Like so
Yeah, there's a pot of food on that so you can recognize how time, so-called timing, works. I use the term timing versus just time because it kind of makes more sense in the sense that it can be a present participle or a verb noun at the same time. So I just say timing.
so so I guess like yeah, like you were talking about like a program, if they're working in conjunction with the originator's template or plan or course of nature or correctness, then through their progeny, they can exponentially, I guess, because time, like you said, timing, because it's like I guess a perception thing. Like if time is uh if it's more about timing, then you're doing things like exponentially. Like if you live out your life correctly, and then you're not in a body that is subject to a limited perception of time anymore, then and then your child, continues to carry that torch, then that process is like exponential growth or evolution that you're part of. That who knows where it takes you? I don't know. I don't. I mean, I don't know what what the path would be. Like what that even looks like. What does that even look like for a program? What does it look like for a soul? Like somebody that is um, has realized themselves and their purpose, and then they complete it in their lifetime. They use every part of their time here to fulfill them, their purpose, and then they do things right with their children. What does that like? What does that even look like? I guess is it anything that can even be explained?
Yes, it can be explained. And that's the thing about being here. You don't have to look at things in a convoluted manner. You can, that's your option. But when you're referring to so-called time or timing, you've got perspectives when it comes to time. And in an empire, you look at that first. The empire is going to want you to only use the time measurement or measuring so-called change, and that would be an indicator of time. So it's a way to measure a so-called progression of events and then the duration of intervals between the events. And then that is how you are supposed to look at time. And that's a very subjugated way to perceive so-called time. But that's how it is in this world, in the aggregate, in the large scale. Most people think of that. Why? Because most people have jobs. Most
Yeah.
people come out of a job or so-called career with the intention of what? Taking on a so-called resting role, semi-resting role. Because then after that resting role comes the resting in peace role. But you're taught to think of it in terms of that. And some say, oh, that's a linear perspective. It's not really linear when you actually think about it, but sure, go for it. Think of it in that term. That's the physical perspective. So you're tying it in with so-called physical events. Then there's the dimension approach or perspective. That's where time is considered outside of the third. It's considered a fourth. And so you have the three working together, the so-called three spatial dimensions. And then you have the fourth. When you put that together, it creates this fabric, so-called fabric, which we perceive as a so-called universe. So they're saying that time is what wraps up the three dimensions. And if that's the case, then it's something that is not linear, but has many different pathways. Hence, you hear a certain terminology like time folding or going from one being here and there. That's talking about time, because if you're here and there, that means that the separation of time, there is none.
So you're like your core, you have you have a core, and the core isn't like a quantum superposition.
Exactly. So that's the danger to those who are parasitic, because they recognize that the core is not is ever changing and not changing. And you say it's paradoxical. But so if something is ever changing and not changing, that would mean it exists outside of all of these other so-called realms, which they still cannot prove other than through maybe some physical means or physics. And then of course the whole speculative philosophical nature of time as a concept or a construct, etc.
There's a movie called Predestination that is kind of has a lot to do with what you're saying about the 70-year thing. I mean, 70 years has it shows itself, I guess, a lot in people that monitor the cycles. They have like the fourth turning, right? They say every 70 years is a turning, and then on the fourth 70 year, it's like a big, like massive turning. I've heard people say that politically. And then there's this movie called Predestination where the guy can time travel, but it's only within a 70-year range. And basically, it starts off as a woman that is a hermaphrodite that doesn't know she's a hermaphrodite, and then she gets pregnant, and then she her pregnancy has complications, and then they say, look, we have to remove your female parts. The baby's here fine, but we have to remove your female parts. You're now going to have to live out the rest of your life as a man. And so she lives out the rest of her life as a man. She eventually finds out how to time travel, goes back in time, and impregnates herself and keeps the loop going to where, and the child is her that grows up as an orphan that eventually has this kid with her future self that goes back in time. And it's just like, and the whole theme of it is like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? It's like the rooster. And like, they're like, yeah, you're the rooster, and we use you throughout, I guess throughout history. Like, it's like a CIA figure that like manipulates these events, I guess. And I just think that like, to me, it's kind of the most terrifying movie I think I've ever seen. And like, as far as the concept, because I just never wanted to get, I'm like, damn, am I in this right now? Am I in a position where I don't know that I'm being steered back into a breeding process that's going to bring me right back to the same place, like relative? And it's like you said, some people have a core and they're before time. So they're like in a quantum superposition ultimately. And then there's people that's like, or beings that are, they have an actual like kind of beginning and ending. It's just like kind of an infusion, and the only way they can perpetuate themselves is through this infinite loop of whether you call it inbreeding or what have you, like self inbreed. Like, it's like a crazy almost asexual, kind of like amoeba way of regeneration. And like, and so I just, when it comes to, I guess what we're facing is that this being or these beings that are like this, you were telling, once they reach this point, I guess you were talking about this threshold where they get access to the core somehow. What happened? Is that the revelations point? Is that the point like where they say that the beast takes over for a moment and then, everything that happens in Revelations, or the plagiarism, like you said, that happens in Revelations, that unfolds once they reach it, they get to the throne, and then the throne eventually is their demise, like touching that.
That's a very
Uh,
in-depth question, but a knee-jerk reaction, which I don't do, but a knee-jerk reaction to that synopsis of a film would be to ask what amount of meth was that director smoking or that screenwriter, because that's clearly the epitome of chaos returning, like a Pandora's box opening within one individual, chaos refined or chaos defined. The sense of being where one feels manipulated by forces outside oneself, that would be kind of the opposite of praying for divine intervention and accepting it. So kind of like the devil and the God within, according to those details. But is that your reality? Is that a reality? Maybe for some it is, because that's where they have led themselves to think or believe. But it's not the reality that we see before us. That's why
no,
you don't want to get
yeah.
confused by a lot of the different philosophical approaches to things. You don't allow that to confuse you at all, because it can be if you allow it. These are all the subjective way of having a inner or introspective experience. When I say subjective, it's not based on everything. You weigh evidence. You look at what you know and can see as factual, in addition to what you sense or what you have thought about or speculated about. You put all that together and you come up with a sound conclusion. Sometimes that takes years or maybe even a lifetime to do. It shouldn't. Many things can come quickly, and they should. And you might notice that in the last few years, things do come quickly. Answers do come quickly.
If you're listening, I guess, and you actually take the steps, like,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I mean, I'm not looking at it, I guess, in that exact way, but I guess it's just like the perfect host. Like, for there's another movie called The Visitor where the guy, and they always revolve around orphans, and that's why, like, it's kind of spooky, I guess, and like with the orphan trains and the repopulation, that whole thing. That
That's a constant trope in most of the programming. Mind you, all movies are basically part of the, the fourth estate. They're like a fourth branch of the military or government in this
yeah,
in the hegemony. It's everywhere. They're done to guide in the sense of manipulate your thought processes and your belief patterns, or to set up belief patterns, and of course set up action patterns or activity patterns that you make part of your syndrome or your daily living. That's the purpose of the visuals and the media. It's just what it is. Media is magic. Hence the reason you have to be very careful about what you let in. No different than what you put in your mouth.
yeah,
The food that you eat is extremely, and sometimes even more so, because what goes in your eyes and your ears has a longer or lasting effect, or works in a campaign with what you put in your mouth and up your nose. So you have to be extremely wise and astute. It's better to fast from this stuff. The movies that you mentioned, I've never seen, but because they don't fall from the pattern, I can just hear you or look at 3 seconds or for a minute of a trailer, and I can tell you exactly what's going to happen in that movie. They don't switch. They don't change.
Yeah.
It's the same thing.
Yeah.
And it has to. Parasites don't change up. They must maintain a certain repeat or recidivist pattern in order to maintain their livelihoods or to maintain the host so that they have a place to be. And that would be this entire realm.
Yeah. Like in the movie The Visitor, it's the same thing. The guy's an orphan. He doesn't know his family. He meets some chick in a bar. She brings him back to another part of the country, and then he ends up getting her pregnant, and then so on longer and down the movie he realizes, like, because he goes to her hometown, and then he, like, everybody there acts like they know him, and he's like, I never met you guys before, and there's like there's a bunch of paintings of people that look like him. He's like, they look like me so much. What's going on? I've never been here before. And then late end of the movie comes, and then he realizes that the chick he met in the bar was actually his sister, and so yeah, she was sent out to go find him because, like, somebody tried to take him away from the family to block the recidivism, I guess, the inbreeding. And then so she went out and found him. She brings him home. She breeds with her own brother, and then she she has a son who is him, who is their father, who's like to repeat the whole cycle again. And so I don't think it's like necessarily direct, like so short in that way, but over however many periods of, I guess, generations, with the amount of memory lost through the ignorance and no recall of the dreams. Like, people are just, they're born, they have an affinity with people unconsciously, then they breed vainly, and then they don't even realize who they're bringing back, and then it just like keeps the cycle going, and it's essentially kind of the same thing. And I really kind of wanted to ask you about, like, the nature of the sexual act and the creative process, like, as much as you can squeeze into, I guess, the rest of this live. Like, there had to be a natural pattern to it, and, like, how long was the sexual act? How, like, what were, like, some of the, I guess, the things that were like benchmarks or earmarks, like, that just were like signatures of, like, this is what it's supposed to be like, this is what you're supposed to experience. And then the further you get away from this, you're going into vanity, and then ultimately inbreeding is going to happen because you're going into unconsciousness. And I just want to know, like, what does the sexual act, what is that supposed to be like? Like, I read the Wahoo Ching, and it says in one passage, like, it should be effortless, it shouldn't be forceful, it should be gentle, and these are certain symptoms, I guess, or signs that you're going in the right direction. And I feel like,
That's a fact.
yeah, and the body, I feel like the body has a knowledge, inside of itself, like, that I think people try to bypass through, like, friction and force, like it was saying, like, and if you were actually doing it in a gentle fashion and being present, then it, the body's only it's like a key to a door, and it's like, if it's the wrong person or things aren't supposed to happen, then it'll never have this likeness. It can never. You'll always have to force it. You'll never be able to relax fully. It'll never be gentle because that key does not go to that door. And, like, that's just what I'm assuming. Like, how does this actually look? Like, what is the actual cycle, like, of the Aboriginals? Like, when they were setting the standard, like, what were the, I guess, things that they would tell people? Like, if it's not like this, then this is wrong, or if it's like this, it's right. When you're meeting someone and then you go through the actual sexual act, because you talk to women today,
The law.
I think they.
Oh, go ahead. Complete.
Yeah.
Continue.
Oh, I was saying, if you talk to women today, I think a lot of it is just sexual routine that's, like, injected through porn and movies, and then just the way people are just trained to ravage themselves sexually. It's like the sex has to have this much time, it has to have this much energy exhausted, and this much euphoria in these ways, like, or it's bad sex. Whereas, and even if it leads to no creation, it can somehow be considered so-called good, and I don't I guess would you just innately know, or do some people just will they never know?
The so-called lawless ones, those would be the individuals or beings or groups or tribes that did everything against what was natural, if you will, or sanctioned by the Most High, if you will. So the lawless ones, bred or mated or fornicated, whichever term you want to use, by the moon or at night. Whereas those who had the law within them, they knew that you do these things by day. You procreated or had so-called sex by day, not by night. You did this along with the celestial body, especially the sun, so that, and you notice that the body does work in line with, or is aligned with the celestial body. The male has an erection in the AM. That's the strongest of the day. The female is more ready and willing and lubricated at that point in time of the day. So you're supposed to do so after cleansing, upon a re-arrival, as opposed to waking in the daylight and cleansing, and then returning to your chamber or your bedroom, and then completing the act. So, if you were to look at it together, he or she washed one another, like they symbolically put that in so-called New Testament with washing of the feet between, these are just stories between Mary Magdalene and Jesus, the washing of the feet. But you're supposed to wash one another before the so-called sex act. And that would mean that not just water wash, but up until that time, building up to that time, days ahead, you are making sure that both of you are keeping in line with what is to come. You might have to remind someone, do you want to really eat that? Because that will ruin the following, or that might jeopardize the following. So you would be, as I mentioned years ago, when you asked a similar question, that you would be ready not only in the physical sense, but you would be ready in every other sense as well. So when that time came, the night, during that night, you would be preparing, you would commune with the originator, creator, creator, originator. Then you would, as you arrived or re-arrived in the AM or the so-called morning, then you would go into the cleansing ritual, go back into the bedroom, and then you would take part in the act of so-called sex. And there's no time frame on it in that, in a tantric matriarchal sense. Okay, you got to do everything to get me in the mood and everything to please me, and I need to have at least 6 orgasms before you do the following, and then we can, do your thing and you can get off. That's not the way it went. Although many so-called lawless cultures, that's how they practice. Why I say lawless? You have to look at those cultures and civilizations, and you'll see, yeah, they were lawless. But the things that they practice.
So you re-arrive. I'm assuming you eliminate. You go to the bathroom. You cleanse on all ways.
Correct.
And then you come back and then you connect in that way.
Exactly.
So what is the woman supposed to, what is she exposed, what is her experience supposed to be like, I guess, in that respect? Like, what is she, and like, cause yeah, like you said, like if you're not just bending the knee to this idea of what sex is supposed to be as far as euphoria for the woman, being like the center of it, what is she supposed to experience? Like, if she's actually going through this thing properly, like, is it
Well, most
going to be?
females are housing. They house multiple spirits. They literally are house temples for spirits. Lots of them, and 99.9% of those spirits they don't need in them. So a female, a woman who is devoid of spirit, has the ability to have all of the properties and actions that go with her format and form. If so-called orgasm is part of it, multiple or one large one, whatever is part of it, then that's to happen. It doesn't require him to do anything special or her to do anything special. But most females are loaded with spirits, and those spirits come in various forms, and they inhibit everything. They cause cystic, they cause cysts, they cause dryness, they cause candida. They literally are. They facilitate all of these things. So you have all of this going on, including hang-ups, and then of course what you do physically in the material realm, such as taking drugs, or in the case of so-called birth control pills, et cetera, in jellies and this and all these things that don't belong. Silica, and that does not belong in there anyone's genitalia. If you knew what silica was all about, and silicone, et cetera, and all of these various chemicals that are allegedly safe. And then, of course, the hygiene principle. Hygiene is more than just a greeting, and hygiene is more than just you smelling clean, although that is part of it. Hygiene goes with the electromagnetism between each, and that you give off or exude on your own. You know, your hygiene determines whether or not you want to mate with this person. So you smell him, he smells you, and I don't mean in the bedroom. This is on the street or wherever. But if you have a smell that's either masked with something, that's the spirit, or imbued with something, or it's just foul because you are housing foul spirits, then why would any male in his true mind or true brain want to mate with that? And same with her. She senses certain things, but she goes against. Most people self-violate. They know something is amiss, but they go beyond, or they overlook it. You don't overlook it. And the reason why they do, two reasons. They have no idea, no clue about true sex. And then two, of course, they give in to what they think is the best thing or the right thing, or they're just very vain and shallow, and they give in to what they want at that time, not realizing every act you do has ramifications. It has nothing to do with heaven or hell. It has everything to do with the fact that your actions are going to influence what goes on around you. And I don't mean just in the physical, in the sense that, you know, if you get pregnant and you bear this man's seed, and this man's seed becomes a little tyrant, well, you're both at fault. But the female primarily because you're the house, and the house has a door, and you're the one who controls who comes and goes in that door. So if you're letting everything and everyone in that door, then no one in their correct brain should want any part of that. You control the door, so therefore you have to be wise and astute about what you do to self and what you allow to come into you. And you must be on guard all the time. As far as, I don't mean paranoid, I mean when it comes to your olfactory. I did a parasol on that deliberately, and it fits with this moment. You are to notice, because sometimes you can't see, but you are to notice what's coming through that nose. And if you haven't been taking care of that olfactory, those membranes, the same for the man, you must take care of your olfactory. If you haven't been doing so by allowing yourself to, I don't know, from everything and anything, that would include the most egregious things like smoking or doing coke or vaping or being around fried foods or drinking alcohol, which is alcohol is worse than cigarettes in the sense that it defiles and breaks down and destroys your olfactory sense. But smoking does too, obviously. So if you're doing all of these things, or you're working in a place just because of the money in that place is toxic, you're damaging your olfactory. If you're using tampons, you're damaging your olfactory. There's a direct connect between your vaginal walls, your uterine walls, and your nose. Remember, you came from a mass, one big mass, and it's all connected when you unfurl or unfold. And certain things are not necessarily distal, though they're not connected, and they're far apart. So they share a common meridian. So if you're not taking care of all these things and you're using synthetic clothing or you're wearing weaves, forget about it. That's just a big no-go. And wigs, and fake nails and lipstick and makeup and all of this crap, yeah, you're going to get what you get. You have no surprise. You're going to be full of surprise, literally. And no one should get together on those terms. And this is what's happening. Don't forget about your toxic bedding. Most people are, whether you're a good person, but your bed is evil. You got to look at what you're doing to yourself and the places that you put yourself into. This is no place to play around. It's like if this was Attica State Prison. This is no place to play.
Yeah.
It's a prison, but you don't play around in here. Every little thing
Yeah.
matters.
Yeah. You don't get involved in the streets without knowing the rules and the laws. You don't get involved with sex without knowing the laws of creation. It doesn't make sense.
Very true.
And so for a man, through the sexual process of intercourse, like is he just reaching that threshold of a climax, and then you're both just witnesses to that, or is there actually just like you're mutually, is there ever a focus on pleasure, is my point, or is it just pleasure is just going to be the byproduct of the man being with the correct woman and then reaching that initiation state of creation, the climax point? Is that what his focus should be more so, or what? Like, because I think men can get lost in trying to please the woman throughout their lifetime, and they're not really ever focused on what they actually feel, and then everything's kind of like conceptual and just friction based in order to like get their rocks off, instead of actually feeling themselves and being present, and then just actually consciously initiating creation. And so I always, I guess when I ask that question, like, how does that look? Like, if we're using sex for its purpose, then is the man just going through his process, and since he selected, or they selected each other, through a natural process, is he just going to reach that climax point, and then that should be enough, or is it, or do you actually give some sort of energy to pleasing the woman?
Well, this is why it's vital to know your so-called emotion. You only know basic surface. I know when I say you, I don't mean you, but the basics of emotions are known. I mean, the very rudimentary basics of emotions are known. It's during this act of so-called sex or procreation that the emotions commingle with the actions of the being, the vessel, and they come together. So the emotional state is just your biochemistry, basically, and the things that go with the hormone, so-called hormones that are at work in a higher level, if you will. All of these things come together. So when you want to know, well, when do your emotions come into play? When are they important? Well, one particular time when they are crucial and vital, and are to be known, are doing, or is doing during the so-called sex act or procreative action. And here's why. Most, as you mentioned, if a male, a hypothetical male, is allegedly seeking only pleasure or pleasure principle, meaning going with that linear approach to things and friction, while at the same time listening to her either verbal orders or commands, or based on how she's trained him or what he knows through other females, how they've trained him, he will deliberately work towards, yes, pleasing her, but he has no clue about the emotional state of why he's doing it. Same with her. Yes, both are seeking some kind of pleasure out of it, and elongating or prolonging, pardon, that pleasure, which is really not that long when you think about it. It's all in the mind in a sense, but prolonging whatever they get during that time. That means they have no clue about their emotions. Yes, that's the surface level, the prolonging of the actual act and the pleasure, little spikes of pleasure. These things have been measured by so-called sexologists and therapists from before so-called Kinsey, the pervert, and then beyond. But you can take from them and learn some things too. In any case, they've measured all these things and they've named them, the refractory period, resolution, et cetera, et cetera. But it makes sense in the sense that if you're doing it on the surface level without intelligence.
It's just mechanical
If you know
at that point.
correct, because beneath all of that mechanics is an actual emotional drive. And I warn everyone about allowing yourself to be driven. That emotional drive is often attached to that which occurred throughout your life or in your formative years or who knows what. And in the case of males, because males are, at least in the matriarchy, they are brainwashed, not even brainwashed, they are, I wouldn't say brainwashed, they are programmed to serve female, from starting, your mother to if you have sisters, to any other females in your area, to females in your church, to your teachers, because that's how you're going to see. You're basically bred, and not bred, but programmed to serve females and service females. So and that emotion might be associated with guilt if you fail to please her. But even beyond that emotion, between both male and female, there's a deep-seated series of emotions that are often unassociated or connected with that sex act. Usually it's connected with the desire to be connected, the desire for so-called true connection or companionship. What might have been lacking, and usually was and is lacking, in true parenting. That's why if you're listening, parents, don't screw up your children, because they will end up like you, not knowing what true sex is or true procreation is. They'll be just, and a lot of people want that, they don't care. However, underneath it all, underneath the mechanics, is usually that desire and want and drive to actually have a true connection, not just the pleasure. That masks it and covers it. But if you know these emotions are there and you've gone through them, you know exactly what's what, now you can approach sex, the procreation act, with truth and nothing more. You have no so-called hang-ups. You have no so-called pre-programmed, you call those things, there's a word for it. I want to use the appropriate word. You have no pre-programmed protocols. Usually the male is the one that comes with all these pre-programmed protocols as a result of being raised in a matriarchal society. So he's got these and then of course, all the things that go with that. Don't lose your erection. If you do, you're not a man. Make sure that she goes away from the encounter with a wobble, whatever goes through their mind, the person's mind as they're before and after. If all that's going into the person's head, that is an emotional roller coaster that always leads in self-destruction in the sense of health and in the sense of thought processes and patterns for both, but primarily the male, because she can move on to another male and get the same thing. So she'll usually end up at surface level satisfied, if not completely satisfied, because she's getting everything that he's got. And this is the thing that males are not taught, that you are the one that's giving up something. Hence the reason, don't do it. You shouldn't do it unless that person is worthy of doing it. If you've got a bunch of heirloom seeds and you've got 4 different pots, and one is dirt from, I don't know, underneath a roller coaster, another one is dirt from, some alley, it's got everything in it, cigarette butts, you name it, and then another one is clean soil, it's been taken care of, it's been nurtured. Which one are you going to put your heirloom seed in?
The rich soil.
Exactly. But most don't.
So you got two sides of it. You got the man that's not really present with himself and his emotions and what he's actually experiencing, and because he's like projecting, I guess his own insecurities into this like worshiping or pleasing act. And then you have women that I feel like they have to absorb that energy, and that validates them. It validates them. They feel like if they don't get it, because I've gone through experiences where if you don't give them that release, then I don't know if they just internalize or if it's just the parasite inside them that just takes over. And I feel like it creates a rift always, because it's like to be expected. It's almost like mandatory tipping or something. Like I feel like that's so they're not even really concerned about what they really experience. They just want the euphoria and the submission of the seed, the sacrifice, and because that validates them, and then energetically, it gives them a boost, I guess, for a little bit. They get to circulate some of that, the scraps of that through them. But you got two people that really aren't even present.
Correct. And that wouldn't, in any event, amount to, I don't want to cause any problems on your channel, but you know the word. I don't like the, you've said it already, so it's okay. And I don't like that whole censoring of language in the sense that we are responsible. We're not being irresponsible, but this whole silliness, we can end it by not participating in it. So yes, you end up raping one another. And,
Yeah,
and
for sure.
And that is not what you're supposed to be doing. And of course, you end up, as you mentioned, feeding parasites. They're the one getting it all. So if you say you're not a prostitute, well, guess what? You're a prostitute because someone else is your pimp, and that pimp is a parasite, and you're not getting really what you're supposed to get out of it. The parasite gets it. You get a little leftover, whatever, the parasite says you can have. Do you want to continue having those types of parasitic situations? These are the things that you must ask yourself. And remember, this is so, when you hear me speak, everyone, there's a connection with everything. And there's no accident with Taylor's question. What was before this? The topic was, subtopic, if you will, or secondary topic, was time and timing. But what goes with the procreative active timing? It has nothing to do with how you reach your climax, or when, or whatever, or when you do it at night or day. You're supposed to do it only by day. But it has nothing to do with that, and it has everything to do with that. But primarily, it has to do with the fact that there's a timing that goes with both, and each are different. His timing is different from your timing as a female. Your timing involves several factors. One of those factors is your ability to participate in the overall. And so there is an overall procreative circumstance. In other words, like the oversoul, but there's a procreative circumstance. Each so-called, I'll just say, graduating class falls within their own epoch. Well, depending on when you arrive, you are within a particular graduating class. And it's no different than, use the school analogy. You're in 8th grade with a bunch of other students. I'll just say it's an all-girls school. And you're going to, if you don't fail, you'll all graduate on time. But the key point is you'll all go through certain things at a certain time, and you're to move on. And then after that, you're supposed to be out of here. Well, you can't stay in the 8th grade at 30 or 40. You can't stay in the 10th grade or the 11th or 12th grade or first year of college at 50. I mean, you can, but all of the things that went with it, you don't get. And one of the things that goes with those classes or graduating classes is the ability to participate in the procreative overall activity. You can't procreate after a certain time, so your timing is different. Hence the reason you too must be serious, if you will, or wise in how you choose and whom you choose and what you do with the vessel. If this is a joke to you, okay, well, you can throw these words out your window. But if you are true about your thoughts and about your so-called aspirations, and you recognize this is not the way, all the things that you've been doing are not the way. If you are at that point where your procreative graduating class is almost done, you're supposed to be out of there, well, guess what? You just messed up. Go get an adoption catalog and adopt some children.
Yeah. I mean, we definitely need that kind of hero in the world. But when it comes to the mates, I was talking to my mother about this, because me and my sister are close, similar in age. She's 31, I'm 34, and I'm just like, man, I was, it sounds offensive to women when I tell her, because like my sister, she's with people, like I feel like it's just inevitable, especially in the climate that we're in, the consciousness that we're like, the state of consciousness we're in. Like, I was trying to tell her, like, hey man, because she was with an NFL player, and I was like, hey, if you're with a young man that has energy and money like that, he's gonna have multiple women. In all likelihood, he's gonna have multiple women. And so, if you're willing to make that concession, then you can go down that road. But he's probably not going to be able to be a father, and you don't have the time to be a father. So if you're willing to make those, to bypass that and forego that, then you go with that. But I was trying to tell her, like, man, if you're with somebody that might be like 41, 45, he has like a steadily growing estate, and he's not trying to be with a bunch of women. He's past that, even that thought. And he's like, look, man, I just want to be a good father. I want to have a family. I want to protect my wife, take care of her. I've been taking care of my body. Then he would want to be with someone that's younger, because for the most part, 45-year-old women or beyond, they're not going to be. A lot of them going into menopause at 45. So like, he can't even. It's like physically, objectively, for a lot of them, not even possible. And then the risk of complications are even greater. So it would make sense for the older man to be with the younger woman. He's past the drama. He's been established in himself, taking care of himself. And the woman now doesn't have to, you know, try to be, something that she's not, in a sense, like, 'cause she's on a different timetable. They have women, I feel like, operating as if they have a timetable that's like a man's. And
That's the problem.
yeah, so I was making the point, and I feel like a lot of women took offense to it. I was like, how many women over 30 or reach 30, they don't have any children, they never had an abortion, they don't use birth control, they don't use condoms. How many of those exist? For the most part, they're they're outsourcing the control over their body through abortion, through birth control, through condoms, and when they could just be controlling their body. But they shouldn't even be reaching this point of I guess, indecision and insecurity and confusion, to where now they're in their 30s and don't have any real plan. But it's because they've been taught to be with like a contemporary, somebody the same age as them, that probably is not secure. And if he has a lot of money, he probably doesn't have a lot of time. So how can he be a father? And it's like, it just sets up the situation where we're in, where you have 50% of marriages ending in divorce, and more people just foregoing marriage altogether. And well, I'm not saying you have to go to the state, but I mean a commitment between two people where you're like, this is forever, or this is for at least till the child's an adult. Like, I feel like that's becoming obsolete almost at this point, because women, they want this Disney movie, like, oh, I'm gonna be with someone the same age as me. It's like institutionalism, like, oh, we were both sophomores in high school, so we're gonna be together forever. Or we're both 30 years old, so we're gonna be together, and this is who I'm supposed to be with because we're the same age, and this is what Disney told me. Instead of like, all right, if you're 25 and you're with a 45, 50-year-old man who is not going to run around on you, and he has established himself and took care of himself too. You don't want an unhealthy man, but why would you go and be with the 25-year-old guy that he doesn't really even have his estate set up, and how much does he really know himself?
Mhm.
Given the climate now, I mean, at different times, maybe a 25-year-old man did know himself, but right now it's different.
Pardon, continue. Pardon.
No, that's all I was gonna say. I just felt like I got a lot of flack for saying, like, hey man, men shouldn't even be concerned with just trying to find somebody the same age as them. Like, the pressure is totally different. Like, the pressure is more so like, find that stability in your life, get a profession or get some sort of a state established to where, you're growing and you're securing yourself, securing your life to where you can actually be a father and a protector, provider. And instead of trying to just find a woman, like trying to find, like you would say, like, this is like trying to find a $10 bill on the street or something. Like, the amount of time that you would take trying to look for that, it's not worth it, just.
Exactly. So, in short, men and women, or males and females, must respect the hierarchy, no different than in any other part of this realm, as we spoke on earlier. And when you don't, here are the things that occur. Parasites, the wealthy ones especially, you can't do what they do, and don't think you can. They can have timing at least at their disposal to a degree. You cannot. So, for example, using some of the models that you mentioned, a 55-year-old billionaire, if he wanted to take on a 45-year-old female, he could. He's not going to lose anything. He probably already has children. And if he hasn't, he might not be interested in them. And if he does, he can always get, pardon the term, but it's a modern term, I guess, or so-called modern term, a side.
Yeah.
That's what it means. Literally, side means additional, a tangent. He can easily get one. Nothing wrong with that. He can do so. And the progeny will be supported. They won't have to want for anything. Why? He knows where he is. He's in an empire. The thing that people forget, especially females, you're in an empire. And all those things, those little aspirations and wishes, and those don't come true. In fact, wishes you shouldn't be doing. Get that out of your vocabulary. And then the concept of I'm going to be all of this. That's what males do, and that's not what you're supposed to do. If anything, if you're going to be planning for a future, you should, and your education is key to you or important to you, then your education should be STEM based only, meaning science, math, etc. Why? Because you're doing it because when you have children, you can homeschool them, and you won't have to put them into the empire structure so that they can avoid what you had to go through if you were not homeschooled. So now you can do that. In other words,
Yeah.
you're building self for the future with a spouse, not building self for the future so that you could be alone. That's stupid and foolish and every other thing you can think of. It shows illogical foundation in you, and you know where they came from. You don't have to blame. The thing that you must do is not relive them or abide by them. Just come out of them. If you're
Yeah.
willing and ready to do so, then make it happen. Don't keep talking about it. Stop wishing on it. But the danger of so-called social media and all of these platforms, people talk about it and it becomes entertainment for them. But make it happen. Start doing it. You want a community, you actually have to make it happen, literally. And then, of course, that means a lot of, like Taylor talks about introspection. And if you listen to his questions, you'll hear this is a person who's actually been through a lot and has thought about the things that he's gone through and then done something about it. Are you doing the same thing? Or are you just, talking about it? If you want to see a difference in the mate as opposed to the mate, there's no such thing. But if you got mate, you got a problem. If you got partners, you got a problem. You should have one mate. I'm talking to the females now. And how to get that mate or how to arrive at that mate, not get that mate, but arrive at that mate, that all depends on what you're doing to yourself. Because you're going to bring in the things that you don't want. But if that's what you want, then that's what you're going to get, because what you're saying actually underneath it all, that's what you want. And the complaining you like doing because you love drama. So it's part of this cycle. On the surface, it's saying, oh yeah, I don't like it and I'm tired of it. But actuality, you read under it, what you're actually saying is, I love it. I love being tortured. It's a bondage discipline type. It's an S&M. It's a sadomasochistic mind. That's parasitic. So you got to deal with these parasites. And for the male, almost the same thing, but different. You have to work more on true self and get out of this matriarchal programming that has you doing things that females do. You're not a female. You are supposed to lead self and then prepare for leading your mate. There's no dinosaurs running around and gladiators trying to kill your family. So this concept of protector and provider, yeah, that goes in line with everything that you do, but you're not going to be walking around with a sword. So protection comes in the form of what? Oh, that dude said something funny to me, honey. Oh, should I punch him? No, you're not going to go there. That's not protection. That's some Will Smith, Jada Pinkett Smith garbage. You don't do that,
Yeah.
Madden. You think for yourself. And remember, I said I always say this: protection is a two-way street. In other words, in order to protect, the one being protected has to what? Obey the protector. Otherwise, what are you doing? You're using him as a proxy thing to go and beat up people who you don't like, or put himself in harm's way so you can get off on seeing him beat and say, oh, he stood up for me. That's twisted. That's parasitic. So in order to be protected, you listen to your protector and you don't put him in harm's way. That's protection.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like if you're a 25 to 35-year-old man, the chances of you having the resources, the time, and the mastery and the knowledge base to be able to raise children and provide, like protection through like financial protection and what have you, like the chances are really slim that that's even going like that you even have the knowledge to be able to manage yourself in that way. For a lot of men, it's just not there where they could say, all right, I have a wife, she don't have to work or I don't have to work, and now we can take turns being home educators and we can teach our children ourselves. And I know chemistry, I know multiple languages, I know how self-defense, I know these at 25, 35, it's as far as this current climate of the amount of work, like jobs that a man has to do, he probably is too distracted to even be able to do that. So then you're just going to have your kids raised by the government and they're going to be raised against you. And
Exactly.
I just think the focus is like, as far as a man, the man is so focused on getting the woman instead of focusing on like building his estate. And then I feel like women are so, they never even have to even think about what it takes to keep a man or put themselves in position to connect with a man that will provide for them and actually be honest with them. So I feel like women men, they go through the process of like cultivating a personality. They go through rejection and they try to do all this stuff to like acquire women or to get attention from women. And then I feel like women, they just they take whatever comes. They never really really position themselves in a way to where they could actually connect with a man that knows himself and you can actually truly. Hmm?
In an upside down, one of the ways a an empire maintains itself is to twist things. The up is the down, the shadow is the light. So when you look at this world and this realm, according to so-called stats, there are more females than males. More males die in utero, and then as a result of so-called chemical issues. But I I don't go with that stat. I think that's the medical so-called industry killing people. But there are allegedly more females than males. So in the realm of nature, those who have a higher number, or at least in agriculture, even if we're talking about agriculture and farming, if there's a smaller amount of one thing and a larger amount of another, then the thing that has the minority status is the most crucial. There's something about it that makes it highly prized. Therefore, in the realm of the so-called human, who should be the one competing? It should be the female competing for the male, not the other way around. Like, why are you competing? There are enough females to go around. And what's going to happen is, as some have said, because there are more females than males, then you're going to have a lot of females who won't ever have a man in her life. Because why? Because you've got a small amount of males vying for this bunch of females over here. And those females aren't even competing for his anything or showing any signs of wanting to be a mate and a support mate. Mm-mm. So something is wrong with this whole picture here. If anything, she should be preparing herself and she should be getting prepared by the females in her household to be a wife and mother. You know, what's the whole purpose of playing with dolls? You know, to be a hoe like Barbie? I don't get it. You know, what's the whole purpose of playing with dolls? Doll play was supposed to be training. You're an adult in training to be what? A wife and mother, or just a mother? Well, guess what? Those dolls were teaching the girls to just be mothers. So even in the so-called innocent days, they were teaching people how to be single parents, and that was wrong. And so what were they doing with boys? Teaching you how to go kill another boy. So they were showing you how to break up brotherhood. They didn't do this on the upper echelons. Upper echelons, they don't play that. You didn't see them playing with guns and toys. They had real guns, and they're out there learning how to shoot to protect their wealth, to protect their families and women. The average everyday person, they had fake guns, and they're out there playing so-called cowboys and Indians and learning how to kill indigenous people. What's up with this? You know, you see how this all works on different levels in order to maintain a hegemony. So what you should be doing, and what is too late to do in the sense of going back into your home and getting someone to teach you, is now you have to teach yourself. You have to teach yourself, and that means unlearning all of the things that you have been doing. So every man, unlearn all of the things that you have been doing. Learn how to literally do things with your hands and your mind and your brain. You should at least speak at least 2 languages. You should know how to do any type of carpentry. You should learn every type of thing that you can do with your hands, whether it's gardening, whether it's electrical work, all for yourself and your home and your family. And these are things you just have within your repertoire of knowledge, not because you're going to get a job. It has nothing to do with that. You're not there to serve an empire, although you're in an empire. This is just for self-edification. And then, of course, learning how to spot who or whom to trust. First, starting with your own gender, how to spot whom to trust, because those are the people you will be working with closely, regardless of their so-called race. Because now you're in this whole big mix, and regardless of other factors. So you're going to have to know who's true and who's not. Then you take it to the next level, because you'll be encountering females that will be potential spouses, and you have to know how to and whom to allow into your confines or into your confidence. And she has to prove herself. So this means, you have to learn how to trust. And she has to do the same thing. But she's doing so, if she's in the optimum circumstance, she's under the guidance and protection of her household. But, we know that that's not there in most instances, even if it is a 2-parent household. Many people are haughty, so they don't listen. Many people come from places that are indifferent, so there is no guidance and protection coming from the household. So yes, in short, many of you are on your own, but don't cry the blues about it or self-implode about it. Make the difference by unlearning all of these patterns that you have been inculcated with, and then starting afresh and not doing and repeating the same mistake. It does help to have community. You don't have to all be living in a farm somewhere. You could be in a small town or a big city, but you're developing connections. And through those connections, many things happen, whether it could be anything from a job interview to meeting your mate through someone who introduces you. All the various things, because you're acting as if you're this solitary atom in a world and you're all by yourself. If that was the case, everyone would have their own planet. But we're here, and there is a reason for us being here.
Yeah, and the whole point of these talks and these connections are to promote people actually coming together for community, either directly with you or I, or with each other, and we can we can actually have like a network of communities.
Correct.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of finish with I guess like an identity thing, as far as like how to identify who's who. I wanted to identify, I guess, some of these people that are well-known people, well-known faces, and be it pale faces or melanated faces, of all different walks of life. And I just wanted to ask you some questions about some of these people so that you can maybe make it easier for people to identify who's who and, what is what ultimately. So I remember like some time ago you were telling me that Ving Rhames is more of one of the Aboriginal like prototypical faces, I guess, in media.
Do you have a slide?
Yeah,
Oh, I was just wondering if you had some.
yeah, I got the.
I can see.
So what would make Ving Rhames different from I don't know Puffy?
Okay, I have to look these people up. I remember the latter individual from obviously trending videos on
Yeah,
YouTube.
yeah. At this point,
Yeah. So does he have a gap in his two front teeth by any chance? I'm just curious if he does.
I don't know if he got I don't know if he got work done, but I don't remember him having any from the movies
Okay.
I've seen. But he might have got work done.
Okay. And Ving Rhames, uh, I
Yeah,
don't. Does he? How is his?
I got.
How are his teeth?
I don't
The
know.
upper teeth?
So the teeth are a big factor.
Yeah. You remember you come from a mass, literally like an egg yolk, and you develop out of that, and everything is the same material. It just separates based on some structure, some minute structure, some building block structure having a variance, and that change gives you different formats of tissue. So your teeth, your gums, your lips, they're all in a particular format. And those formats are, they come from your seed line and basically kind of an instruction to make a certain pattern. Fans outside or so-called environmental or egregious environmental instructions, which often happen too, these patterns will occur over and over and over again. The gap in the teeth is the deformity. You often see a gap in the teeth, or you see a particular format in the upper lip. It looks like, I call it the rosebud or the baby kiss lip. You see little babies, they look like they're about to kiss someone, the lip purses. Well, there are people, their lips are automatically like that, even in a relaxed state. And then if you look at the teeth might have a gap in them or they might not, but that is all related. Those are, you can call them defects or deformities or inconsistencies. There is a so-called perfect mouth, and that's not it. No differently than the thin line, someone I know call it the extraterrestrial mouth because the lips are almost non-existent. That too passes along and it stays in a seed line. You see it again and again and again. That is a inconsistency or deformity or defect. But it also points to a particular bloodline. That's the main purpose here, to say, well, who comes from where and or who is related to whom. You might see a snout type upper lip and gum line underneath the nose, so it almost looks like a snout that you would find on certain animals or certain mammals. You see that in certain groups of people, and they on the surface look like they're unrelated, but those characteristics connect them. If you were to trace, you'll see where this characteristic comes from, similar instructions or the same instruction. Uh, what's an example of that? Let's say Whoopi Goldberg. She has that snout type, almost like a coconut, half of a portion of a coconut rolled over, and then the lip and the upper lip is
She got that 50 cent. She got that 50 cent gap too.
exactly. And so they're all from a particular seed line.
I
That means
don't
there's a
know if you.
connection there in the, relation. Does it relate to how people think and act? Sometimes it does, especially when they come in confines or closeness, propinquity to groups that there might have been a historical clash. We allow these things in the so-called animal world to exist, and we admit to them, like, okay, the dog chases the cat. Why? Did someone train the dog to chase the cat? Did the dog get programmed by movies about dogs and cats? No, it's just innately in there to do so. But not all dogs chase cats. You've seen dogs who are friendly to cats and want to befriend them. It's all in how they are brought up. So it's partially so-called environmental, but the rest comes from where? The instructions within.
Yeah, that programming is deep.
Mm-hmm.
Because some dogs just, well, they have such a deep prey drive. They're just going to go after anything smaller that, yeah. So
But
I
it's
don't know
not
if
just
you ever,
that. There's other ways to determine the actual lineage of people and their connection. And yes, also sometimes mindset. Obviously, these things are known by certain upper echelon, so-called. I don't like the word upper echelon, but for now, upper echelons of so-called clergy. They know that, and this is also true in the fields of psychiatry and psychology. They know that there are certain patterns that, if put in propinquity to other patterns, you'll get certain types of behavior. It's not
so,
just based on surface level or current programming. If I put one gang group in and another gang group into a prison, and I know that they're enemies, I know I can cause a certain type of clash and get a certain outcome. Well, you can do this through various types of input and program.
that's why I wanted to ask you about, some of the big gang leaders or gang faces. Like, I don't know if you've ever seen Whack 100.
No, I haven't.
I don't know if you can see my screen clearly.
Oh, pardon me. I was looking at the. Okay.
I don't know if it's too fuzzy for you.
The I've got a. Will I be able to see it if I go to the website on the computer? Because all I see here is the chat room. How do
Oh,
I
damn, man.
not see the chat room?
I don't know how you look at I never been on Instagram Live on a computer, but
Okay, no worries. I can look this person up instantly. So I'll just open up my machine here.
his name,
What's that person's name?
Whack, like WACK 100, like the number. Whack 100.
So he's killed 100 people.
He's just a big face of the Pyru Bloods, and he's a big face in the hip hop scene. And
Okay, well, you can just use your imagination to determine the connections of people. Um, the mouth, you can see on the upper side, that is somewhat of inconsistency, but you can also see his connection through his nose. I'm looking at a picture that he's not looking head on. I have to see, and then the eyes, of course. If you were to make him pale, and of course his hair is shaved, you can't tell if it's a hollow follicle or uh, a curled follicle, or where
mm,
where it's a spiral pattern. You can't tell. Maybe some people keep their head shaved for that purpose, so you can't tell from whence they came. But if we were to make him pale, you would just say that's the guy from Thailand, allegedly so-called Thailand, or maybe Myanmar or somewhere. You couldn't tell. He looks just like them. Now, the next thing you would check out is let's see his profile and look at his skull shape. Typical so-called Mongol skull shapes, which you will find in a lot of so-called Latin people, especially in Central America and South America, so-called South America, is the back of the head or the skull is flat almost. So I
mm.
don't see. I'm looking at a photo where he's looking head on, so I cannot tell. But anyone looking at him would say, "Oh, that's a black guy." You can't. You got to look deeper. You'll see that maybe one or two generations back, he's got a Caucasoid, so-called Caucasoid, at least one grandparent. And then beyond that, you can see his. And then of course they look at the brow ridge, and you can clearly indicate. I call it the Statue of Liberty, or the $1 coin brow, where the skull it goes right into the nose, the nostril, or the nose, cranial of the nose. That you don't see in so-called Negroid or Hamitic people typically. You might see overlapping in the male. You don't typically see that in the females. Females more recessed, but in the males you see it overlapping the brow ridge, or there's an indentation. And you see that in many so-called white people. You see that in many so-called black people. But then in certain so-called white people, there's none. It just goes straight up, and I call that Statue of Liberty look, that Cro-Magnon, so-called Cro-Magnon look. So you can tell the connection. The many stereotypes are built on this man's face, this Wax 100 face. They claim that the so-called black has wide nose and big lips. Well, if you check, you find more so-called whites with wide noses. Just take a trip to southern Italy or Ireland, you see huge noses. And
Ireland for sure. Ireland, I see it. I see it definitely. And I mean, I definitely see it. And then the other side of the coin, I guess, or the Crip side, you got Big U, Eugene Henley. He just,
Big U or Eugene Henley?
His name is Eugene Henley. They call him Big U.
Okay.
I mean, these are people that are controlling, since like when it comes to media and hip hop culture, a lot of it is ran through LA. So like Big U especially, when people would come in, whether it be athletes, entertainers, he would extort all of them.
He looks like the other. Nope, I'm not laughing, but he actually looked like they could be related. And
Him and Wack, yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised, man. So they would extort people whenever they come into LA. So everybody that had to come in LA, if they want, if you want to live in LA or if you, whatever, like you'll get robbed if you don't pay them to protect you, And so like they have such a toehold in the media and the people that can actually do business in Los Angeles, because if you do music, you're going to have to be in Los Angeles. If you get to a certain level, you're going to have to work through at Los Angeles. And I feel like they have, because like the reason that we know Nipsey Hussle, a big reason why we know Nipsey Hussle is because he was underneath Big U. And I mean, he was a talented guy, I guess, but he still, Big U was the one, doing a lot of the legwork because he controls the Rolling 60s. And it's basically like a paramilitary gang within melanated society. Well, that's kind of like,
many of these people are Hamites working on Shemites. They come from, many of them come from the islands, so-called islands, like, or they're Bayesian or Jamaican, pardon me, or Trinidadian, or not very many come from the so-called mainland Africa. Some come from Europe. Then, of course, there are those who do come from so-called mainland Africa, like Ethiopia or Somalia or Nigeria. And then, of course, after being first and second generation, they don't admit or tell anyone, like a lot of groups, they just blend in. But even though they might be in a controlling situation, they're one faction. Who do they have to go through to get what they completely want? And in the Americas and around the world, the pale skin, they're pale skinned cousins in the form of the so-called Khazarians and the so-called Italians, which are a mix of Khazarians and Moors, et cetera, et cetera. They run distribution. So you're not getting anything out there without them. And
that's why you got Vlad TV.
Exactly. And so Vlad TV has to answer to those who come through the Vatican. People think, okay, it's the Jews controlling. Who controls the Jews, so-called Jews? Well, you can go to the Vatican and find that out. And so, yes, you wonder why your music is controlled by the Vatican, or did you ever even think about it like that? No, most people don't associate the two. So if you want to pinpoint the biggest hip hop mogul, look at your Pope.
And is there a black Pope? I've heard there's a black pope.
Well, well, there's just a shadow pope. That's someone that sits underneath. There's always a shadow realm. There's always someone who's in control of things. And what people don't recognize, the surface level is done. It's just basically witchcraft 101. What's on the surface is for the profane masses to see, and as long as they maintain their conflict and their positions in the hegemony, everything will be fine. But if you look beyond the beyond, you recognize that, for example, the Pope actually, so-called Pope, on the surface, that's the surface level, the so-called white Pope, has to kiss ever so often and show homage and tribute to a certain faction, a certain family that comes from Central Africa. And ever so often they do this showcase, in public. It has to be done in public, where the Pope will kiss their feet or kiss their hand or whatever. These are controllers, but you would never know that. And one of the main ways to stay in control is to stay out of the sight of the profane, or the masses. That's what I said earlier. At the very beginning, everything is connected. And when I speak, and so you'll know that what I said earlier, where there are factions, and often they vie for control. Control over what? It's like parasites within. They vie for control over the original and the resources that the original had. They don't know their own birthright.
So the Jesuits and the so-called Jews, they fight for the levers of power, because they're only at a certain level of power, and they're just like, well, I want to get as much in this level as I can get, I guess.
Well, they don't typically fight. They have the masses to do the fighting.
Okay.
They don't have to dirty their hands. That's the old saying.
Yeah.
Well, I go to law school when I can hire one. That's if you're wealthy. Well, when they know this language and they know the setup, it's not about just what you know, it's about what is. You just don't go against protocols. You're not going to find Jeff Bezos going over and doing a drive-by on Bill Gates. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, no. So what about a guy like Cat Williams? What was his background? What would that be?
Let's see if everyone is astute enough to recognize from what I just said. If this is a stage, and it is, then all the players, the men and the women, are players. All of the people that you see, whether it's on someone claiming to be against the system and someone claiming to be a proponent of the system, controlled opposition, working the same team. Others are just little pawns. No one is going to come out and say anything unless it's sanctioned. And even if it is fact, the mentality is, what are you going to do about it? Nothing. And in fact, letting out truth is done deliberately and often in movies for the purpose of, because the brain, these are people who are under the Bernays school and the Freudian school of thought, where they know that
Edward Bernays.
Yes. They know that things work in tandem and often opposite. So what you think is fiction, or what you are told is fiction, the brain knows is real, but because you're seeing it in an envelope of fiction, two things will happen. You'll feel helpless, and second, you'll think this is all fake. So when you see a Cat Williams allegedly, and of course, look at what Cat Williams does. He's not going to point out any Khazarian. He's not going to point out any Lebanese person or any other of the other controllers or any Han Chinese people. He's not going to point them out or mention them by name. So you know which group is under the greatest thumb, and that will be the Shemite, because there's no other group that uses the nigger word or nigga word or any other epithet or so-called slur against itself. You can't see any other group doing that in the so-called limelight. And I went into what limelight is in the past. No other group does that, and they better not do that against any other group. You're not going to see someone come out with, on Def Jam Records, screw you pick an ethnic term. They're not going to do it, and it will never
Yeah.
happen. But at the same time, you have to think, what kind of witchcraft is going on here, where you have a group using a term against itself, and now what has happened because you deal with this separation, this split. Now it goes into the natural nuclear split. The female, the so-called black female, the Shemitic female, has separated herself. She's now a different race. It's no different than, they do this a lot with other groups. I'll show you how. But she's now just a black female. The so-called black male is a nigger. You do not see black females calling themselves that. You do not see anybody else calling them that. They're not calling them nigger, but they're not going to call them nigger. So who's the nigger? The nigger is associated with any Shemite who's got a penis. So now you see a split there, and you can see it in the behavior. You don't see any so-called, not any, but what's promoted is anti-brotherhood, anti-nuclear, with the so-called gangster rap, kill, shoot, kill a nigga, shoot a nigga. Where do you see any other group doing that? I can listen to reggaeton. I don't hear anybody saying that. I can listen to, any kind of Hasidic folk song. I don't hear it in that. I can listen to Chinese cultural music or traditions. I don't hear that. Or even in their pop music. No other group is doing that. So who sanctioned that? Who put that out there? Even though these so-called, the names of those two so-called gang members are out there, they have a level of control. They're nothing more than willing pawns. And yes, they might have an upper level of control. And more than likely, they're not Aboriginal, but they fit in, and the damage is still the same. And no matter what anyone says, there's no excuse for, and I don't care who you are, there's no excuse for using a term that is actually derogatory against yourself. You're not going to change that. That so-called argument, an illogical argument, has been debunked, disproven, and it is moot. It is false. It's fake. It's beyond fallacy. There's no rationale for using that name. They say, oh, well, we've twisted it around and we've spun it around and we've taken the power back. No, you can't do that. Where's your dictionary? Where's your Webster's where you do that to that word and all other words? All you're doing is adding it to the lexicon and allowing everybody else to say, you know what? We're going to use it too. And this is what's going to happen. And you now see other groups, as I said, the Shemite is the older brother and the one that people follow. And so now you have other groups calling each other that. You can see it on TV or YouTube or wherever, not necessarily TV. And you see these other groups calling each other that. That's the so-called N-word, or just calling themselves nigger. So these words are part of their semblances, their signs, their symbols, and that's why you have to be careful in this place. This is what's happening now. I
remember one time, you were saying that words are like, it's a technology itself, the word.
Correct.
What about a guy like Boosie? He's always with Vlad, little Boosie.
I don't know these people, but what a silly name. Boosie.
Yeah.
I'm not even going to say what it sounds like, but let's just
back
say,
pussy.
Right, exactly. It sounds like something that certain people would use in terms of, perverted activities. Now, this individual, I'm looking at his image now. This individual is, again, a willing pawn. And Vlad, you can't even get any more obvious than that. Vlad is associated in most people's minds with Vlad the Impaler, stuff people try, who put his enemies on spit and impaled them. So what's going on with this character? He's literally sucking these willing idiots dry because they go on there and they do what? They do nothing more than lambast each other, critique one another, which is the purpose. There's no change or progress even. That's not a pathway to progress. That is a recidivist pattern. It's actually a cyclic pattern, meaning it's worse. It's not a go back, go forth. It's a loop.
They all just end up snitching on themselves and get caught up by the hip hop police or whatever, and or killing each other.
No, they're in shorts, so it's part of a pattern. It's all set up. Someone has.
No, I'm talking the artists themselves. Like I feel like they go in there, they act ignorant, that spreads, and then they end up in prison, and that spreads the idea that that's okay, and then or they kill each other.
Some are willing, and most are willing in the sense that they're not too bright or brilliant. And then you have a faction of those, they know exactly what they're doing. They're not from any so-called ghetto. They have never seen any police action, maybe a traffic stop. And they don't speak like that when they go home. And the grill probably comes out and you see their true teeth. There are those
Yeah.
that are actually part of the stage.
So, all right, what about a guy? I don't know if you ever heard of the CEO of Google. His name is Sundar Pichai.
I just happened to look down at the screen. Okay, pardon. That's, that's an interesting fact. I've read about this individual. When you're dealing with the corporate structure and the people that are put in place, the CEO, these people are no different than in the sense of a political faction. You put in the people who not necessarily are voted by popularity, but the people who have to come with certain types of not necessarily talents, but they come with a particular level of clout, but at the same time they're also on a list. So it's not like this is an organic appointment or election. In other words, he was known already, and so when it came time to put him in that place, he's in there. Now there are probably several others that could have gone in there, but no different than how the popes are picked. You have certain number of so-called cardinals and there's no others, and then they know who's going to be who. No different than in your election. So you're not electing anyone.
Yeah, so election.
Mm-hmm.
All right, there's a guy
And
named, oh, my bad.
so go ahead.
I was gonna say there's a guy named Adam 22, one of the bigger podcasts. He's basically just the other Vlad, but I don't know if if you look at him, maybe you could. Is
Adam,
is he a Adam in the number 22? I would say is he what am I looking at here? Is it Japheth? Is it Canaan mixed with Japheth? What was it? Is it Edom? What am I looking at?
okay, I see a bunch of different. I don't know who is he a mutant?
Yeah,
Okay.
got tattoos all on his neck.
I This guy has a hoodie on. Adam 22. This is someone made a meme photo. It says Adam 22 is a federal agent, or aren't they all? Um, I don't see any other. Oh, okay, I see. I see a clear photo. The small photo. There are not many photos of this person. Sometimes it's fine. Okay, there's a larger photo. Tattoos are often used to, I guess, in a sense, visual code switching, like one does with a language, to hide amongst groups, certain groups, and fit in and get in and fit in. Often those tattoos are sometimes either removable or temporary, when depending on the agent's purpose. So if they need him for something else, they'll put him in something else. But let's look at the ears. The ears, if they look like a cartoon character and they stick out, that is a particular bloodline too. Ears are not supposed to go that way. This is a particular seed characteristic or programming, if you will, or plan or structure, coding, you name it, whatever you want to use, whatever word you want to use. But there is a seed instruction. Those seed instructions carry out and they show themselves in the countenance of the individual. Well, his ears are closer at the base, at the lobe, and they flare out. There are some that flare out even more. That's a different connection as well, different seed line. You can find many that have that same look. Look at the mouth. Many who have that typical, almost quasi hair lip, which is a deformity or inconsistency will have facial hair to cover it, or they'll get some type of surgery. Well, you can see where he comes from. His bottom lip is almost like a flat plate pointing inward. He's got the brow ridge, and you can see with the furrow. So he's definitely of those tribes you mentioned earlier. And then many look at the hairline. There's a slight point to it, so he would be consistent with the Turkic, a Mongol Turk, because they have almost like a pointed hairline, comes to a point in the middle. These are hairline, not hairline, but these are characteristics you primarily see in the male feed, but you see them also in the female feed.
Okay. The other biggest podcaster in the hip hop culture, and I'll just be done, I guess, with that is a guy named DJ Academics.
Again, someone I've never heard of. Adam 22. Why does that sound very familiar? I'm just okay. Adam 12. Isn't that a name of a police call sign?
It might be. See why they say he called him that. It doesn't say why he would pick that name.
There's a lot in the name. So just to be so-called cute and inconspicuous, while at the same time in everyone's face, he uses Adam 22. He's not 22. So, you know, if you change, don't you change?
His real name is Adam Graham Mason, Maison.
You have to be kidding me, correct?
His name is Adam Graham Mason, man. He's one of the most influential. Yeah, that's his name.
These are definitely not real names. Adam 22,
It's a
green name, and then Grand Mason. For one, many of the so-called mutants, again, don't be offended anyone. If you are, your emotions are there. Many of the mutants and the so-called Cabbage Patch Kids that were here in the so-called beginning of the 20th century or came here in droves, they were given new names.
Like Esposito, the orphan train kids, right?
Correct. And
so this like a brand.
The names, it's a brand, but it's also a way to maintain a roadmap. Years to come, and we are in the years to come, we are in those years, you can, if you have all the information, you can tell who's who and where they went. They kept track this way of all the so-called orphan trained babies and all of the others, so you can keep track of where they are, or what part of the country they went, and from whence they came. So these names you're taught by media and movie and indoctrination that people were forced to change their names so they could fit in, or so that they wouldn't have to offend the so-called Anglo. Those are all lies. I'm sure there's some iota of truth to them, but for the most part, that's not true.
So who is a Aboriginal celebrity that we can point to get maybe one of the faces of one of the original nations?
You can. I don't know of a lot of, as you know, I don't keep a tab on pop culture, and I don't watch television, and I don't watch media.
I mean, maybe people from your generation or generations near yours, like, so maybe somebody from Earth, Wind, and Fire or something. I don't know.
Well, here's some. I don't know if a lot of. I didn't keep in touch then with this stuff. I was really too busy absorbing a lot of knowledge and learning and experiencing the different ways that I had to learn, so I could be prepared for now. But here are some of the so-called characteristics that you can see transcending so-called race or so-called ethnicity. One of them, you can look at the nose. The nostrils are visible. The holes in the nose are more visible than in others, kind of like a pig look. You see that in a lot of Central Americans, so-called Mexicans. You also see that in a lot of so-called melanated people in the Americas. You see that in a lot of islanders. You see that in the UK. It's very distinct. In the
I
UK,
seen
it's
pic.
got even sharper. They look more porcine, meaning more pig-like than other groups. You see that a lot in many different people, but they look, they look separate in the sense of so-called race on the surface. But if you trace the seed pattern, you'll see that there's a connection. You don't just get these looks accidentally. That's what you are trained to think. Like, oh, this just happened. No one throws a sperm and egg against a wall and you just get what you get. No, these things are part of patterns.
Yeah, you go into a bank and get money out the bank. It's not like you would just, the money was there. It's not like it was random or something.
Right. These things are already set in motion.
So, is there anybody that you could point to maybe, or nah, you just want to go off of just giving us features that so we can recognize better.
Yeah, that's better because I don't know of any names of any. Literally, I didn't watch TV, so I guess some might say I was deprived of pop culture, but I don't look at it like that. I went in and experienced it deliberately as opposed to having it thrust upon me. I literally went in and watched certain things just to see what was going on, but for the most part, I did not participate in it because I knew the difference between junk food and real food.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it pays to know. I mean, a lot of people wouldn't think that Edom is Ethiopian, or like that Nipsey is an Edomite, or that a lot of Somalians are Edomites.
Exactly.
So I think if you just don't know, then you're going into the situation thinking that these people are on your side just because you might have a similar shade. But
that's the danger of most people, but primarily the so-called Aboriginal or the Shemite. They they've been indoctrinated to think if it's black, vote for it. If it's black, it's your friend. If it's black, furthermore, the fact that they, are taught to say and think that they're black. You're not black, no more than someone is white. You know what black is. Why lie and say you are something that you are not? Black is an adjective for one. Two, you can't see black. Literally, it's an absorption of all colors, so-called shade. And then why would you associate yourself, your lineage, your access to resources, your birthright, what is rightfully yours, your landmass, etc., with this so-called non-color black? That means you're under some type of something. You can call it a spell, call it a curse, whatever, and your participation further exacerbates it. And here's the thing with so-called white people. You're not white, and many of you already know that. But by the same token, many of you do practice that same, okay, if it's white, it's okay. If it's white, it's right. This is my friend. And then what happens? You end up on the news.
yeah,
because someone so-called white took advantage of you.
There's this thing.
There is a distinction, and many so-called whites don't know that, and they think, oh, they're related. Hence the reason why you have all this mixing. There was a time when people would say, oh no, we're not doing that. I used to see this through many centuries, and I would see, for example, in the 20th century, so-called 20th century, you had separation of factions, and you didn't cross the line. You had Italians over here, so-called Italians over here, you had so-called Polish over here, and only certain groups would mix. It wasn't only, until they started to strengthen this whole ideal white characteristic and hegemony in contrast to so-called black. That's the whole purpose. If you notice, there's always the contrast, and the contrast always has to have black, white, nobody else. So what does that say? The implication is everybody else is either one or the other.
So when it comes to all right, so what would Mel Gibson be? A guy like Mel Gibson.
In terms of his connection to this hegemony, he would be classified as so-called white.
No, I mean what if you're looking at this type of so-called white person, what would they be? Is this a Yaphetite? Is this a Canaanite? Or are they?
No, most definitely lyrically, he's definitely got the Yaphet hook through and through. There's no such thing as an Australian. That's the thing. People say, oh, he's Australian. No, if you know the so-called history of so-called Australia, you recognize that most of the people sent there, primarily males first, many of them out of their head, many of them literally psychopaths. This is not any type of conjecture. This is not to put down anyone, but
It was a
Australia
prison colony, right?
a prison colony, and not just a prison colony. What they don't tell you, they emptied out asylums, so you had a lot of mad people there, literally mad. And so when females were brought there, uh, rape was a huge problem, and not just
So,
rape and murder,
yeah,
because many
yeah,
of these males, no female in her right mind would want to, mate with them or let alone have sex with them. So they were doing Cro-Magnon Neanderthal style marriages. Grab a female from a family, they find a daughter, somebody's daughter, she looks pleasing, and they wanted her. They would literally take a daughter or two, sometimes take the mother, take her, she's gone. And if the dad got in the way or a brother got in the way, usually they kill off brothers. They would kill off a lot of young males who were being killed. They would kill him or them and take the best looking sister and then the mother. I don't know why. So I guess she could cook and teach this one how to be a wife. And then they would just
yeah.
rape babies. And this is what you get today. You get this, so-called Aussie style, and Aussie style has no, um, redeeming characteristics to it. And then, of course, you get the whole weeding out of the Aboriginal as well along the way.
So what is a guy like Alex Jones? He always claims to be German, um, but like you would say before, the real Germans would be swarthy.
Correct. So if he is, then he's got a one drop in, and then he's not telling the truth. So if if he's Germanic, then he's more than likely a hybrid mutant. That's all.
So what about Larry Bird?
Larry Bird coming from allegedly from what, the New England area of the U.S. Um, very tall. He looks like he's a mixture of a lot of different things,
Yeah, that's
primarily
the.
so-called Siberian and Han Chinese.
Oh yeah, you're right. Now that you say it, I see that. It, it's the thing when pale people or with melanated people, like at this point, it's so much mixing that you're seeing so much at once, kind of in the features.
These are the places.
What what about Trump?
Trump, red hair, Neanderthal, Cro-Magnon mix. Red hair is the least found trait in the so-called code or plan, seed plan, because for one, many females control the acceptance of sex or the rejection of sex. Many females won't mate with a red-haired male. You have to want that. Many don't want that. Many people, you ask most so-called white people, they might think it's cute, but they really don't want a red-headed anything in their family. They don't mind a so-called blonde or a so-called brunette, but a redhead, they'll accept it. They'll think it's nice and cute. But for the most part, you ask any female, she's not. If she had a selection of males to choose from, she's not going to pick a red head or an orange head or whatever. She's not going to do that. You
Yeah.
look at certain phenotypes; they have kind of like a lizard skin. If you look at his skin close up, you see that the scales in his skin are larger than most people. That in itself is also a trait. But then you look at the facial features. His facial features point to a so-called North African feature. So he's got some mixing going on. And like most so-called whites, you can't get pale without mixing. You're taught
Eh,
that pale is pure. No, pale is just a hodgepodge. It's the inverse of black. That means you got a bunch of things in you and it's mutated.
So what is Elon Musk? Because he looks super Asian to me,
He
and
is.
I know they.
That's a Mongol. He's got Mongol traits not only in the face but in his mindset too. His mindset is to take over, and that is a Mongol mindset. He's a Mongol Turk to an nth degree. That means, and most of the people who came out of so-called South Africa, whether they so-called Dutch or whatever. That's also a lie. They're not Dutch. Afrikaans, that's also a lie. Most of them coming out of there, you make these connections with these people. Trace his grandfather and his grandmother, as well as all of his cohort. Even I think they called them the PayPal group, or there was a name for them. They all have a blood connection or a faction connection.
Yeah, I mean Peter Thiel,
That's
and yeah, yeah, because
they were all South African, so-called South African, and most of them took part in or funded the Coast Project, which was a plot to, and it's not a plot that's over. They did it. It went through. They have it. They're sitting on it. It was a way to use ethnic bioweapons to wipe out the so-called one drop. And the same thing that went on in Europe in the 30s and early 40s under so-called Hitler. They did the same thing. It was to wipe out the so-called one drop.
so they're always trying to get rid of the bridge. They're always trying to wipe out the mulattoes, the quadroons, and octoroons, because that's like traces them back.
Correct. And now you have this Aryan Jew, of today, and they don't have that one drop in them any longer. It's still there. You can't wipe it out.
They're just so far removed that like if they stay on a grid that has a certain kind of radiation, they eat a certain way, and they're like insulated by only their kind, then they'll just stay, insulated from,
It's inbreeding, basically.
Yeah.
It's just basically inbreeding. Ever so often, each of these groups has to go outside the group in order to mix up the bloodline, but it's inbreeding. If you look at so-called the fringe Shemitic groups, these are just basically hybrids. They're more Yaphetic and Hamitic. You find they have a characteristic, but that characteristic is more Hamitic than it is Shemitic. You find it in hybrid Shemitic groups, and that's the so-called disorder or disease. Some have it, and they call it. It's similar in nature. Sickle cell, Tay-Sachs, they all have a similar connection in what it does to the cell, but you only find it in these particular groups. They say, oh, it's only in the Mediterranean Arab, or it's only in the so-called Jew, or it's only in the so-called certain so-called African groups, Western African or so-called Sub-Saharan groups. That's a blood connection, and it's a blood connection to an inconsistency, no different than these facial features that you see. These are codes. These are mutations. Just like
and this is how they recognize each other.
Exactly. The genetic code for pale mutation is SLC14A5. It has been years that it's been known, or at least released to the public in abstract and so-called peer-reviewed papers. But they've known, and they know that this is what creates so-called whiteness.
It's like the 13th or 15th chromosome, I forget, right? That has the mutation on it.
Mm-hmm.
Something like that. I forget. Yeah. For the eyes and the skin. What about have you ever heard of Bernard Arnault, the French dude that owns Louis Vuitton? Oh, damn. Yeah, Bernard Arnault, I don't know, he just looked kind of evil to me. I just thought maybe. So what about Jeff Bezos? I know you know Jeff Bezos.
Yeah, well, the wickedness, if you will, I always say, to take it outside of the realm of the mystery and the mystique, I just call it what it is. The parasitic comes out in the facial features as well. And if you look at, I'm looking at Arnault right now. He has no upper lip whatsoever. He looks like, and the shape of the head, the almost triangular shape, you only see that primarily in so-called Han groups or Khan groups, so-called Chinese, with a very wide upper part of the skull, and then narrowing down to the jaw line, and then of course his mouth, what terms of the extraterrestrial mouth, like the gray, so-called gray. He literally has no upper lip. That is not what man is supposed to look like. Man has lips, okay, but he is a hybrid. I'm not saying a hybrid alien. I'm just saying he's a hybrid mix, and this is how you get these looks. as far as his feelings towards mankind, and humanity, that comes out too. In other words, if you despise people, if you have a hate for people, that's parasitic, and that will show itself in one's face. But you have to know how to read it because it can be very subtle. Many of these parasites you cannot tell because the face looks so kind and grandmotherly and with a smile. It's very difficult
Yeah,
to sometimes read, but you have to know how to read these faces.
it's like knowing the patterns on a snake, kind of. You know this one's poisonous, this one's not, and
Correct. And animals, if you notice, for the most part, if they haven't been altered in some way, shape, or form, or discombobulated in their processes, their cognitive processes, they know what enemies look like. Certain animals in the sea, for example, will not eat a sea snake because they know what it will do to them. And on land, land creatures, that includes mammals, they know how to spot danger. Think about it. Most animals will stay away from most people.
yeah,
Is that a
yeah,
result of what people do to them? Possibly, because you can say it's residual trauma passed down through the seed code.
yeah. It's gonna be in there. Uh, we only got a couple minutes left before the live cuts out. I guess I wanted to ask you, I guess, about the Waltons because I remember you were saying that there's a witch that lives on top of this crystal deposit in Arkansas, and I know the Waltons are from Arkansas, so I wanted to ask you if you knew anything about the Walton family or anything, or somebody asked me. Somebody said, "What about Mark Zuckerberg?" But I think like his choice in an Asian wife kind of lets you know. But
Exactly. He knows. He picked, well, you want to talk about matching? Well, he picked the right type of wife for him. It's in his seed line. You know, there are a lot of so-called racist, so-called white people who say, I'm not related to any Chinese person, I'm not related to any Asian. In actuality, those are your parents. You come from them, and you come from a mix of them and the so-called Dravidian, the so-called person from India. You can take a so-called Dravidian and just picture them without their melanin, and you have a so-called white person. You can do that with many Asians and Chinese. They share the same blood seed line. But
are the Andaman people, the people in the Nicobar Islands, are those Shemites from India?
those are those are original people pushed off into islands, and they are also Yaphetic, like many island
Okay.
cultures. And you can see, if you want to see the originals in many different formats, look at some of these islands because these islands represent people who were pushed from their original so-called territory and off and out of. So they're remnant. And if they've maintained their genetic, um, I wouldn't say purity, but if they maintain their genetic so-called homogeneity to a degree, you can actually
Integrity.
see integrity. That's even better. You can tell from whence they came. So many of these hybrid groups around the so-called realm, that's what they want to do. They want to emulate genetic integrity by weeding out and maintaining. Wealthy people already do that stuff. So-called wealthy people, they already do that.
Yeah, that's where we're at. So I know it's going to cut out. I wanted to close before it cuts on us, before we have to, just for, it just cuts out on us. I don't know if there's anything you'd like to say, or, I mean, everybody check out pharaohshouse.com and at Pharaoh's House to follow Pharaoh. And I'll put the posts up on everything publicly on YouTube and everything. And I'll send you the post if you don't grab it off Instagram yourself, Pharaoh, for you to take it or however you want to grab it.
Okay, yeah, that would be great if you could do that. And as I mentioned at the very beginning, before, emotions, keep them in their appropriate space. This is not to be insulting to anyone, just truth and basic facts of what we know as remnant on this realm. And here we are. So don't just sit on it. Work forward in your own life in order to build community first within self, and then if you can within family, and then take it from there. But literally, don't just sit on it. This is not entertaining.
The whole point of this, like we were saying earlier, is to develop some type of network of communities and establish our own communities and hash out how people want to work together and build something. We got 30 seconds left, so you could take that however you want, Farrell.
Okay, well, I appreciate you, Taylor, and everyone for the presence and participation.
Yeah, thank you, man. I'm glad we're able to connect and get this done. And whenever you want to re-up and do it again, let me know, man. And it's been a pleasure. Thank you.
Likewise, likewise.